Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring me. John, I do not know what strength is in my blood. But I swear to you, I will not let the light city fall. Our people fail. Our people.
Our people. I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
Okay, people, welcome to The Narrative, episode 12. We've hit a dozen. This one's called System Shock. You can guess what that's all about. Thanks a lot for the support of this show. Last week was a fun one. We had Lieutenant General Stephen Quast on, and a lot of people thinking that might have been the best episode yet. But not that there's any pressure on my guest tonight to top the General or anything like that. But really excited about all the support we've been getting, all the feedback we've been getting. You guys sent a bunch of boosts and stuff last week that I'm going to get to at the end of the show tonight. As I always say, this show it pretends to be broken up into segments that I usually ignore or forget about. My guest will probably remember the segments better than I do. We do the story right now, we do the theme and the thesis, and then the third section of the show is all about you guys. It's boosts, it's rants, it's interaction. You can go to badlandsmedia.tv, click the boost button. There's now a button. You don't have to navigate a bunch of menus. And then you can pick the narrative, submit your boost either for this episode or another one. Our main sponsor tonight is Save Pulse. You can see the promo code there, promo code Badlands, badlandsmedia.tv/meds to give them some support. We will get to them at halftime. I want to give our main sponsor some extra love. I think that it allows people to kind of get into the show, make sure that they're getting as many eyeballs on them as we can. But we also have another sponsor tonight that I want to give a shout out to, and that is our friends at Pet Club. Experience the miracle of a God-given first responder for your health and an ally in your body that fights everything from minor ailments to major health threats that allies your immune system. At Pet Club 24/7, we harness the ancient wisdom of nature with our exclusive potent strain of medicinal mushrooms revered for thousands of years for their immune-supporting properties that are extremely safe, with no additions or overdoses, no side effects, no interactions with medications. Transform how you manage health with our all-natural products and help Pet Club change the world one pet and one person at a time. Elevate your pet's health game and yours with our natural time-tested solution. Explore how we're redefining wellness for both pets and people. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/pet club now. Ensure we're redefining wellness for both pets and people. That's badlandsmedia.tv/pet club. Treating pets and their parents better. And again, we will get to our second sponsor later on. I named this episode System Shock. I want to talk about systems. I want to talk about sovereignty. These are words that we throw around all the time in the info war. I'm guilty of it. Everybody is. But I don't think that we dive into these terms quite as often as we should. And they're very top of mind. The story of systems, the story of sovereignty is front and center in the info war right now. We've got the Dogening. We've got Elon Musk and his merry band of retards. And that's not meant to be a slight. That's just what's going on. Just like Badlands, merry band of retards. All of you watching this show are retarded as well. You know, it's just the way things are. So we're going to talk about the Dogening. We're going to talk about sovereignty. We may even talk about the Bible later tonight and some really interesting perspectives on that, on Jesus, the little things that we're going to figure out on this show later on. You probably know my guest tonight. You'll know him as a Bitcoin maximalist who co-hosted Rug Pull Radio. He's kind of taken a step back because he's been really busy with his job. And Bitcoin might come up tonight, but if you're annoyed about Bitcoin topics, I hope you didn't go running for the exits. That's not why he's on tonight. What doesn't come up often enough with my guest is that he is actually a systems engineer, or started out as a systems engineer. Have a lot of great conversations with him behind the scenes. And since his show was one topic focused, I know he brought this stuff up in accordance with that show topic and show theme. But I really thought he'd be the perfect person to talk to about Doge, about systems, about engineering solutions to systems. Are there solutions to systems? All this kind of stuff. So my guest tonight is Patriots in Progress, an engineer and a system lover. Welcome to the show, Pip.
Yo, Chedley, how you doing tonight?
Not too bad,
it's good
man.
to be here.
Not too bad. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's been too long. I miss all the Badlanders. I miss you guys. I see you guys very infrequently on some of the chats, interface very lightly at this point because, like you said, I just have been pulled away right now to support a different mission. And not to say this mission's not equally important. And all things connect. As we'll talk tonight, I think there's just no limit to where we could take this conversation tonight. It's going to be awesome.
Exactly. I mean, he probably got a kick out of it that I sent over, just a broad topics of what I want to figure out tonight, Pip, is everything to do with systems from a macro level and everything to do with sovereignty. Just really little topics. If we get to it, I'd like to figure out the meaning behind all of the most important scenes in the Bible. I'd like a deep dive on everything that Jesus did, why it was so important, all this kind of stuff. No, anyway, I mean,
I am absolutely up to that challenge.
Yeah. And, Pip and I, obviously you've been a little scarce lately for good reasons. But yeah, we've had some really good conversations. We butted heads before, just like I'm wont to do with everybody. And I love that. Pip, Pip's funny because he's very I wouldn't want to use the word meek. I use the word meek in the biblical sense of the word, not in the modern vernacular. You're kind of reserved, you're soft spoken, you can be, but Pip doesn't back down if you push him into a corner rhetorically, cognitively, anything like that. And I love that kind of stuff. I don't think we're going to be arguing on the show tonight because this is stuff that I'm really interested in, that we're both interested in. But what I wanted to have Pip on the show to discuss is systems. Like I said in the intro, it's a word we talk about all the time. I mean, I don't know if I coined the term, but I certainly use the term system of systems when it comes to the deep state. I use that interchangeably with the deep state, almost more so because I think it more accurately paints a picture of what we're dealing with. And to fast forward to 2025, it's so interesting to me and encouraging that not only do we get all these memetic deployments going on with Donald Trump being who he is and Elon Musk and all of that, but the way the public is interfacing with Trump 2.0 right now, it seems to be very first principles and systems focused. Like they're bringing the system front and center. They're not just saying, oh, the deep state this, the deep state that. They're getting into the system in a very public manner. So I want to get to all that, but I want you to explain, because I've never actually talked to you about this, some of your background professionally, cognitively in systems, and just kind of what you bring to the table there, why you got into it, and kind of on a macro level what you've kind of gotten out of that compared to maybe when you first got into it.
Yeah, all great stuff, and this will be a great conversation, undoubtedly. And I guess I'll start with, I don't know that most people know what systems are. Like you said, we throw around that term all the time, and when I look around, I'm sitting on a system, I'm looking at a system, I'm talking into a system, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. And when you realize that literally every single thing around you, to include your house, to include your car, is engineered by engineer people, then you can really start to understand, like, okay, now if I'm going up against the system, how might I need to think? And like you said, this is truly a system of systems. And so It's much more complex. And so, yeah, I thought about how to maybe start the show. And I wanted to also give a little bit of background into the break that I'm taking right now and why. And I thought to do that, it would be best to give that background. Most people probably know at this time. And if you don't, I went to school for mechanical and aerospace engineering, mathematical minor. So lots of math and lots of science and just all the good things. And I didn't anticipate being a system safety engineer. And so that's my title, but that's basically an overlay of systems engineering. And we're oftentimes interchanged and either reporting to them or in the same organization. And we follow their process essentially, hand in hand, because we're validating and verifying that what they're doing is safe, maybe for a warfighter, maybe safe for the public. And there's all different types of things. I think when I tell people I'm a safety engineer, most people think like, oh, he's like OSHA and he's like making sure people aren't falling off
crash test dummies. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's truly a fascinating profession because like for rocket systems, that's where I started off. I was building and keeping safe rocket systems, much like Elon builds over at SpaceX. I was working for a competitor company. And to do system safety, you actually have to understand all of the subsystems and the components of these machines, and you then have to analyze, how do they interrelate? What are the requirements across interfaces? How do you test these things? And so that's kind of where I started, was in the rocket and satellite business, and that's really what I would consider the signals intelligence business. That's really what satellites are going up there to do a lot of times. There's all different kinds of satellites. They do all kinds of different missions. Some of them are classified. Some of them are not classified. Some of them are for NASA and they might have a science purpose behind them. Some of them are commercial, and that's maybe where you get your Google Maps. And so I had sent a video over just to kind of grease the skids a little bit and get people I wanted to give people a solid footing before we really start breaking down some of the systems discussion. But the NRO put out an interesting video, just kind of giving a high level discussion of what they're about. And so it kind of gives you that background of where I started.
Great. All right. We'll play this. It's a minute long, and then we'll get more into systems talk.
People have always thought that big ideas were impossible until we made them come true. Finding new ways to innovate, helping humanity prepare for the unpredictable on the planet we call home. We see from the perspective of stars. And push beyond to keep the world safe.
Interestingly, I see in the chat there's a bunch of people that seem to have similar backgrounds to you. We've got some regulars here. Tom Terrific said, Pip, I may have worked with people I know. Pip, I think you may have worked with people I know and worked with. Deborah Stars says, wow, Pip, when we were talking, I didn't know this background. You had to have run across my dad, L.E. Erling, at some point.
You never know who you run into in these circles. Like, I think you were talking with General Quast. You were talking about the meetups, and somebody met their dentist, and you just don't know what you're going to find in the Badlands community, and who knows who. It's truly a small world sometimes. And so I won't confirm or deny anything. But I wanted to start there because when I started in this industry, there wasn't a Space Force. Everything was operated by Space Command under the Air Force, and it wasn't until maybe I was 8 years into my profession that Donald Trump came out and started making those actions to build Space Force. But truly, what Elon does and what the company I work for does, and what places like Blue Origin does, is they bolster and provide capability to the warfighter in a large sense. And so I thought that was a good footing. And so where my life has since transitioned, I would call that systems safety. I would do safety on systems. Well, now I do what they call systems of system safety. And so now I have like 5 different systems underneath me, and I integrate all of those and do a higher level analysis. And so I'm very much more like a forest versus the tree kind of guy. And what I do now is more offensive and defensive, like missile capabilities. And there's all kinds of different systems out there. But what I believe I support now is much more of the great power competition. You may have heard that terminology before. The Space Force, it's really the DoD at a larger sense, has put that out there. And it's a really interesting framework. And I might hit on a couple things after our next video to kind of discuss, okay, what is the great power competition? Because I think that'll give us, again, a solid foundation for then talking, okay, how are we fighting systems here, and what is a system? So
yeah, I want to get deep into different, because one thing I want to go into tonight is it's a bit of a paradox in my head, in a good way, where I think when we use the word system, I think this background and foundation setting is good for the show, because when we use the word system, I think that in this community we've got a negative connotation assigned to it, that we can dive into. Why was that intentional, etc. You bring a different perspective to it, and I think that that's one of the major themes, just for anybody wondering, like, why did I want to talk about this? Why do I want to get into what systems are, and the story behind systems, the logic behind systems? Is because I think, first of all, we need to understand what we're fighting against, as you just mentioned, right? But then we also need to understand, are systems bad, or is this just a war-fighting technique, a macro that has been kind of weaponized against us? But I can play this great power competition clip if you'd like me to play that.
Yeah, go ahead and play that now, and then we'll have the videos out of the way, and we can just start having that discussion.
All right, guys. Great power competition. Oops, is this supposed to have audio?
It's supposed to have audio, yeah.
Okay, I can pull it up on YouTube. I probably imported that wrong.
Okay,
all right.
Well, no worries. While you're doing that, I guess I'll go into more of like, okay, what is a system? And I think if you look at things like inputs and outputs, what is the design requirements? Like, what is this thing supposed to do? So like when we're talking about like the deep state system, what is it designed to do? In my opinion, it's designed to bring about slavery and oppression in a large sense. And almost in every case I look at it, I find out it's pointed back at me. And over time, you notice those patterns. And it's like, well, I think this thing is intentionally designed this way. It's, we saw the money laundering. We'll talk about the Doge stuff. But it's supposed to do something, right? It's supposed to have a function, form, fit, and function. And then when you're looking at design validation and whatnot, you got to think through things like statics and dynamics, so all of your physics. How does this thing operate when it's standing alone? How does it operate under pressure? How does it operate when it gets hot or cold? And so you really quickly get into very complex arenas of engineering. And, especially like when you're building a rocket system, it's like, this thing's got to work perfectly. If it, one wrong valve or one thing gets stuck, it's very likely to fail in a catastrophic manner. And so sometimes you'll build in things like fault tolerance, where you can have so many things go wrong before something bad happens. And so when you're thinking of like fighting a deep state system, how fault tolerant is it? How fault tolerant was it? Over time, are we breaking down some of those inhibits to catastrophic failure? And I think we are. And then, maybe, do you have the video now?
Yeah. And maybe this either before or after the video, that prompts the thought, just focusing on your background again. You can answer it either before or after, whatever's more relevant. Did your background in systems, was that what you think clued you in to the existence or the reality, not just the conspiracy of the deep state, or I should say the theory of the deep state? Is that something that clued you into that? Or was it really Bitcoin that reverse engineered you into sort of what we call the awakening and the reality of the system of systems, the reality of the deep state, and the weaponization, I should say, of systems? Or is it something that you already were perceiving and then that led you into Bitcoin? Like, which order was that?
Yeah, good question. And I was very much an awakening after 9/11 type thing. I started to notice the system when I was young. And what I noticed was the 24-hour news cycle and how that was brainwashing and changing the behavior of my relatives. And I started to think more deeply about, well, why is their behavior changing? And asking that Socratic method, why, a lot. And what I found was that, there was a system out there. And when I heard like at the time, dark web, or, the internet was pretty new, like conspiracy theory, I started thinking like, oh, maybe there's something to some of this. Mm-hmm. And then later, as I became an engineer, I'm like, oh man, we're up against a system. And then I learned about
see how it's
Bitcoin.
Designed, right?
Yeah. So I think with Bitcoin, that's probably having the systems background is probably why I understood it a little bit quicker. And I not only understood what it was, but understood how it was the solution space in a large sense for the current system we're up against. And so we're fighting systems versus systems, if you will.
Yeah. And I think that gives away the game. That's where I thought you'd go with that. And that's kind of where my mind has been trending. And we'll get to that later tonight of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? One of the terms I use a lot is the Hegelian dialectic that we can talk about. And one of my main theories going back several years is that we're not destroying the Hegelian dialectic. We are reversing it. We're using it. But we'll get to that. So this is a video on a great power competition that is relevant to this discussion.
We've always been the big guy in town. No one could compete with us. The threat has changed. Now we're looking through a lens that is an existential change and an existential threat out there. And we have to be prepared for it. If you think back to the world on December 6, 1941.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
And on December 8th, the world changed and we thought completely differently. We thought differently on October 4th, 1957. than we did on October 6th when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik.
No nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. It really is.
And we thought completely differently on September 10th, 2001.
Closing doors, please.
Because of a changing world environment. And I think that's what we're looking at today is this changing world environment. And now I think we're in a time of strategic competition with peer competitors. We have to think differently because of this world change. It's much bigger than the Department of Defense. It's actually bigger than the whole of government. It's a whole of nation effort. That's where I need the help of the industry and academia and our departments. All of us have to come together to understand the threat and be clear-eyed on the competition that we face.
Yeah, so take all that for what it's worth, but I think the underlying theme there is that the great power competition, in my opinion, and what I've seen, is the transition from traditional states of war, traditional domains of war, to the new warfighting domains that we see. And the great power competition has really driven this effort for integration across all of the different like service, like the Army and the Navy and the Marines. And so where they used to be siloed, they're now integrated in a larger fashion. And they're doing that so that they can respond more quickly to all of these emerging threats, right? Psychological operations and different types of like terrorism or rogue actors. How do you defend against all of that stuff? And so really what you can consider the great power competition is the system of systems that we're deploying to counteract the deep state's, let's say maybe military industrial complex, or, you know, whatever you might want to say. And I'm not saying that those two are at odds in fighting at this point, but that's kind of how I see it is, you know, there's white hats in both, there's black hats in both, and they're always warring and whatnot. But to your point earlier, you asked if systems are bad. You know, there's this negative connotation when you say the system, and we recognize that we also have a system, and it's kind of like a gun. It's kind of like money. By themselves, they're inanimate. They don't really do anything, right? It's the operator behind them that causes it, or the incentive structure behind it that causes it to be either good or evil. And so I'll say that.
Right. You know, when you say that too, there's a few terms that I use fairly often. One of them, when you mention system of systems, I think this goes both ways, but I use the term archipelago sometimes to talk about what I think is going right for us. And we'll get into this with Doge next. But one of the trends I think I've noticed in the info war of the last however long, several years, is when it comes to combating, I'll back up. I think what the enemy, what the deep state, what we'd call the deep state, has recognized that maybe we didn't for quite a while, is almost a holistic approach to systems. So what you just were describing, right? You're talking about this power competition, and we talk about power projection a lot. You know, you talk about it in the context of soft war, Bitcoin, but there's many different types, right? For me, what I'm obsessed with is narrative power projection, storytelling power projection. Finally, now it seems like everybody's talking about that. I've even got people almost word for word reading my articles from a month ago and not giving any attribution for that, which is interesting. We see you motherfuckers. But anyway, I'm not the only one it happens to. It happens to everybody at Badlands, I would say. But that's power projection, right? And what you just described, this new era that we're entering, you know, on the good side, maybe on the Patriot side, it seems to be less about inventing new modalities or new systems of competition, and more maybe about recognizing that the way we've been using systems have been this archipelago, like this siloed approach where there's the military over here, and there's the financial system over here, there's media power over here, there's storytelling over here, right? Financial power. And that's how the good guys have been viewing it all. Like, here's this role, here's this system, here's this system, here's that system, where it feels to me like the deep state has recognized long before we did that there's a layered approach. The narrative power projection is parallel to financial, is parallel to kinetic, is parallel to clandestine, right? Like these are threads of systems that are operating atop one another simultaneously. That's kind of what that makes me think of, and that that maybe is why we've had such trouble as patriots, as Americans, recognizing that it is all these disparate systems, because the enemy has really been, I mean, to give them credit, they've really been unified, right? Like as an example, I'll pass back to you for your thoughts, but as an example of this, we'll get an actual deployment, a bomb goes off somewhere, and then immediately the narrative doesn't get provoked from that actual. It was already layered in. It was preceding it. It was Hegelian dialectic, that the narrative system, the media system, was seeding the actual. The actual is triggered by kinetic power projection by the clandestine system. The narrative system picks up the ball and runs with it. Then the political system comes in with their solution, right? Like this full coordination of all the cogs in the watch that is the deep state. And is that what, first of all, what do you think about that characterization? And second of all, do you think that is what, when we describe a plan by patriots, is it basically a recognition of that or a reversal of that we see going on? And that's why we've been getting our asses kicked for so long until, the advent of Trump and some of these things like the Q drops, like Bitcoin, some of that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, and I would just say that it's extremely multifaceted. When you're talking systems of systems, you're absolutely right. There's systems that run in parallel, like think about the legacy media construct and how that was captured, and then think about the central banking apparatus and fiat currency and how that was weaponized, and then the healthcare, and you just have all these different silos. And so the Patriots, in order to successfully come against that system of systems, they had to do things like the Q drops just to fight the legacy media and do the narrative projection. And then they had to do something like Bitcoin to fight the fiat currency and the rampant inflation that was killing everybody and bleeding us dry. And so I think that the Patriots got much, much better at that. And what I liked about that great power competition video is, right, wrong, or indifferent about anything that was said, it very clearly demonstrated that there were periods and times where there were deployments that fundamentally changed the landscape, right, in terms of what the human psyche was believing. And over time, they used like the Hegelian dialectic and the legacy media construct to lull us into a state where we couldn't even see the system. I would argue most people can't even see the system today, at least at its large forest level. They might see a tree or two, but they don't see the forest. And so it's still hard for people to reconcile some of these narratives. And it's not as immediately obvious to the casual observer what's going on. If I go out to Walmart, I can't have this conversation. I'm a crazy guy still. But I might be able to have a piece of that conversation and get it to make sense, like in the financial aspect, which I think is probably the easiest. So I pulled some, so like the goal of the great power competitions to maintain competitive military advantage. So we always have to be first. We always have to be ahead of the game. We have to understand our enemy in order to combat them. We want to strengthen alliances and partnerships, deter aggression, reform and optimize resources. So, I mean, like your sovereign alliance, right? Strengthen alliances and partnerships, right. Deter aggression. Like, how are we posturing ourselves to cause the enemy to not act, right? When they think that previously maybe they could act. Reform and optimize our resources. So things like software is really big now. Artificial intelligence is really big right now. Bitcoin and the blockchain and all of that technology is changing how we optimize our resources. And so I think that maybe us being first, or maybe even us deploying some of that, might have given us the upper hand in that competitive military advantage. And then I like this last one, compete below the threshold of war. Right. So that kind of sounds a lot like devolution and special operations, low intensity conflict. And then because it talks about the integration of the forces, there's 5 bullets here too. And it's talking enhanced multi-domain integration. So how do we have a system of systems instead of previously just a bunch of systems? You can't just go out and vote hard, right? And change the world. You actually have
that's a system of itself, right? I mean, it's a consensus protocol, which I wanted to talk about later in a different context. But I think when you say what your little spiel there makes me think of is one of the notes I had down here was understanding systems. Is it purposeful? This is pretty rhetorical for people in this community, but is it purposeful that people do not understand the system? To your point, we can bring up the easiest cliche that works from Hollywood, from the realm of fiction. Because it still works to this day because it's a damn good first principles portrayal of what we're talking about. But The Matrix, right? The Matrix is ubiquitous with people in the truth community, with everybody from Bitcoiners to JFK conspiracy theorists to MAGA people, right? Like to people who woke up during COVID. And I think one of the brilliant displays of just these first principles we're talking about in that movie is toward the end when Neo, it's not like all the cool moves he's doing and he's breaking the rules and all that kind of stuff. That's what's entertaining. But it's when he's truly awakened, it's not just that he's got this power over the system, it's that he, to your point, he sees it, right? There's the iconic scene in the hallway where the three nodes of the system are intimidating him. They're going to attack him, and you see from Neo's perspective that they're lines of code, right? And obviously in the Matrix movie, it's very literal. They're talking about a computer simulation. But man, if that isn't what it feels like in this community, to your point, where once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like I've often referenced it as a coffee filter. How do you get the coffee out of the water once you've made it? You can't do. I mean, yeah, maybe there's aerospace back filtration systems, right? But I'm just saying, on a practical basis, once you made the coffee's made. Once you've seen the system is made. You've seen it, and it does seem like to me, as obvious as it sounds, the obfuscation and the outward appearance of complexity of the system is inherent in its design, nefarious design from the other side, right? Which might get us more into the solution phase later tonight. But that's kind of from the problem phase is what I kind of wanted to talk about first. And that seems to me to be a big part of the philosophy of the deep state. You could read, if anybody has not read the Prussiagate series, I don't know if you've ever read that,
I have.
But Sean, I mean, that's a great encapsulation of what we're talking about, of how did the deep state start and what was the approach. And I would say that the approach was a systems approach, but it was obfuscated behind a wall of mist that it's hard for people to peer through. And one more point on it would be when you mentioned the voting harder, right? Chris Paul talks about this a ton. You are not able to even have an adult conversation in the truth community about elections, from my perspective, unless you have at least recognized that if you don't want to say they're fake, they are a system that you do not control that is allowing you to interface with a larger system, right?
Yeah, that requires trust and all that good stuff. I think that's a big key in terms of why our enemy was so successful, is because they hid the system of systems. If you think about a matrix, it's really all the silos, all the different systems, and then on a different axis is all the same systems. And so you see the integration of them in a matrix. And what our gatekeepers will do is they'll focus you in on a smaller system, and they'll get you to expend all of your energy in that little system, knowing that they have the fault tolerance, right? It's like you can take down that system with all of your energy, and we still have all these other systems that are controlling. And so you truly have to approach it at that higher level in order to make any progress. And so a couple more things here that the great power competition's after is adaptation to gray zone and hybrid threats. I like that one because it's talking cyber attacks in the cyberspace right now. disinformation was interesting because we see that in the narrative warfare, and then proxies. We're still kind of fighting some of those 4th generation battles, and then global force posture realignment, and lastly, innovation and modernization for joint lethality. And I think the Patriots, at least what G and I have gone to large lengths to describe, is I believe that we likely deployed Bitcoin. It was our system. We deployed the Bitcoin blockchain, and that has fundamentally changed the landscape. And so we got that competitive advantage again. And so that's really all I'll say on that. I think in terms of systems, we also need to recognize that they're not just physical systems. A network is a system. Right. So like you said, there's nodes in the system, and there's information propagation, and how are things, what's your bandwidth? I think we'll talk with the Doge thing. We're overloading their system. We are minimizing their nodes. We are taking them down in a very strategic fashion. And I think that the systems analysis can help us identify that. And so maybe just for a conversation point, throw up that systems engineering V. And so that, I think that helps us to understand the systems, and then we can go to whatever.
Yeah, that was a great looking chart right there. All right.
I like it. It's a good diagram. This is essentially what I follow like every single day in different phases. And I do it for each one of my systems. And then I tell that same story up above at the system of system level. And so at the beginning, you're designing your engineering plans. Like, how are we going to operate? What is our ConOps? What is the management structure look like? Who's going to run this thing? What are our interfaces at the operator level? And then you start to talk about the system. Like, what do we need these requirements to be? What are my system requirements? What does this thing got to do? What do I not want it to do? What does it have to be resilient against? Like, what are its capabilities, its operational limits, et cetera? And then once you have your requirements, you'll boil that all down into your subsystem and your components. And then on the back half, you actually have to validate your system. Do I have a good system? And so G and I will talk like some of those like altcoins, right? I think those were an intentional attack against Bitcoin to test it. It was a stress test.
Layers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, with the fork wars back in 2017, it was a resiliency test. And over time, they were validating the design, validating that it was going to do exactly what they designed it to do. And you do that verification backwards. You go from the component level up to your subsystem and then your system, and you do different types of testing. And there's software involved, and there's hardware, there's electronics. You're doing, like I said, dynamics, like vibration testing sometimes. Sometimes you're doing things in a wind tunnel, and you're throwing a bunch of wind at it and sand. Who knows? But at the end of all that, you have confidence, engineering, mathematical confidence in your system, because you've designed it, you've tested it, and you've validated it. And so I think that's a pretty good definition of systems and what systems of systems are. And so hopefully the listener will be a little smarter on when they look outside in the world and they see these narratives and they see these different, like maybe military actions or these different systems that we'll see. Like when Elon launches 90 some odd Falcon 9s in a year, and each one of them has 40 payloads on top of it potentially, and he's building this architecture around the entire globe, for Starlink. That's a system. Like, and so what is that system for? And so you can ask those smarter questions like, hey, why does it exist? What is it supposed to do? What happens if it works properly? What happens if it fails? Those types of things.
Right. And yeah, that's a great encapsulation of it. Speaking of Elon, just as an aside, one of the things I've been really fascinated by that stuff, by his deployments, not just that we're going to talk about with Doge, but even just Tesla. I've said many times on the shows that I originally had pegged him as deep state, one of them, etc., because I was trying to reverse engineer it and, his rise, the rise of Elon Musk. And I was going, all right, PayPal, then we've got DoD contracts and everything, government contracts. And at the time I was reverse engineering that and saying, the story of Elon Musk doesn't really match the receipts of Elon Musk. Ironically, these days, I see that as de facto confirmation of a white hat plan. The fact that he's got this DoD funding, obviously the infamous Kash Patel clip, which we can also discuss him tonight. I did see the news, Dan Bongino, deputy director under Kash Patel. That all dovetails into the Doge stuff that I want to get to. But one of the things on Tesla is that when you dive into, speaking of systems, when you dive into, you know, let's just say the Tesla Model Y is an impressive system, right? It's a car, it's a system, but the closed loop manufacturing system that Tesla has engineered is extraordinary. When you start reading about it, watching videos about it, researching it, and it's like, once you do, you can understand why there are, just like we talk about in this community, there's Bitcoin maximalists, right? That word sounds crazy to somebody who doesn't kind of see it. There's truth community maximalists, right? Like Q maximalists, etc. America First maximalists. But man, there are Tesla maximalists who are they're not like in this world. They're not in the info war, right? But I was wondering, why do some of these people become like Tesla company maximalists? It's not the same thing as the Apple people and iPhone fans and stuff like that. It's because they've recognized that once you see that loop, that system that's been created where Tesla creates the batteries, they manufacture the batteries, they manufacture the end product, they manufacture the manufacturing equipment that puts all of it together, which is why tariffs are not a threat to a company like Tesla, because they even build their factories, right? Like every step of the chain, they build the place where they build the things. They build the things that build the things. They build the things that repair the things. They build the software that goes into the things. They build the things, and then they recycle the things and create new things out of the things, right? And that's a system within a system within a system within a system. And when you project that onto Ford, you're like, you can see why Tesla maximalists, they say there is no way another manufacturer can compete with the system that they have created. And it's why there are Tesla people that think they are going to swallow the car manufacturing industry, you know, within a matter of years. For as much as everybody, you know, I used to push back on that and be like, no, EVs, etc. So there's all of that. But yeah, it's just getting away from electric vehicles and all that. It's more, how did Tesla corner the market? Man, it feels like a military approach. And I know we know that there's DoD funding and stuff, right? But that's not unheard of. In your world, you probably see a DoD, DOE funding for all kinds of stuff, to all kinds of contractors, right? That in and of itself isn't proof of a white hat plan. But when you look at the complexity and the brilliance of the systems involved in Tesla, it's astounding. And one more point on it that I want your take on. You've probably heard of, as an engineer, you've probably heard of a guy, Andrej Karpathy, one of the, if you haven't, he's kind of considered like the right-hand man of Elon Musk. He's really one of the more well-known Tesla engineers. He doesn't work there anymore. But I was watching an interview with him a few months ago, and they asked him, you know, what is it about Tesla? What is it about Elon that people don't understand, and that makes you think Tesla's going to be the most valuable company in the world eventually? And he said, Elon would get all these engineers into a room to try to design a system, right? A product, whatever it is, manufacturing lines. And the engineers would come up with these incredible ideas. Like, you've probably seen this, you do this in your line of work. But then those ideas run up, the friction comes in where those ideas run up against reality, right? They run up against physics. They run up against money and limitations. You probably deal with this all the time, where you come up with this brilliant solution, but they're like, yeah, we can't implement the solution. Karpathy said the shocking thing about Tesla is that any time an engineer would come up with something that was a solution that had never been done before, he said the parts, the manufacturing, and the implementation would just show up. The word he used was show up. And he didn't understand how. He didn't understand how they'd put together this design of a manufacturing line. And Elon would go, okay, yeah, sounds good. And then a month later, the manufacturing line is built. And it blew this guy's mind of saying, how did he do this? Which makes me think of a Patriot Plan and military backing and disclosure through Tesla. But just in terms of engineering, I'd like your take on some of that. I know I talked a lot, but just those closed loop systems, those systems within systems, it's almost like there's not just one macro system of systems, there's micro systems of systems that are emerging in the modern world.
Oh, absolutely. You can draw the system boundaries at any place. And, some people might call something a system and some people might call it a system of systems. It really is, neither here nor there. You just, from an engineering perspective, have to know what your boundaries are, what your inputs and outputs are. And yeah, a lot of interesting things with Tesla and PayPal and SpaceX and all these different things. And to your point, I don't know exactly how it all manifested. And, I have my own thoughts on, was that a Patriot deployment and, soft disclosure, hard disclosure on different things. But I think I can boil it all down to whoever it was and whatever it was understands systems, and then they build better systems. And so again, with like the listener tonight, it's like, you got to understand what you're dealing with first. Like, if you don't understand fiat currency and the slave system that we're under, you're never, ever going to have the need to know Bitcoin, right? You're just not going to understand it. And so that's why it's so important for these Doge things that we'll talk about to come into play. And then I think also what Elon is really good at, and I think any good engineer is good at this, and even software will mention this, Jason Lowery, is the strangler pattern. So how do you change from an old system to a new system without breaking everything? Well, you do it very, very slowly and very incrementally over time in a lot of cases. And so you'll start small, maybe you'll build a parallel system alongside of it. And then over time, you'll just transition it. You'll start to say, hey, look at the shiny new car versus that old clunker right here. Maybe you want one of these. And the shiny aspect of it gets people to look. And then over time, before you know it, you've replaced the entire system bit by bit. And then you can just retire the old because nobody's looking at it. And I think that's what, I saw Elon do it with SpaceX, with the company I came from. When I started, they're like, hey, Elon, he's a joke, and, he's not going to do anything. And, oh, look, he's trying to reuse rockets. And we've tried to do that. And it's just not cost efficient. He's going to have to reuse these things like 12 times before he even gets a return on investment.
Right.
And then here he is now. Some of those boosters have been reused 25 times. And he's absolutely smoked them. Right? Like, where the record used to be like maybe 15, 16 launches in a year, he just launched 80% of the entire world's mass to payload or mass to orbit payload from like 100 rockets in a year. And so I wrote on it, how does he accelerate that fast? And why did it coincide with the COVID pandemic and maybe devolution, right? So when Trump stepped away, Elon like rockets up, and now there's a whole different landscape. We got Starlink. He's launching Starship. He's got all these Tesla vehicles. And like you were saying, the brilliance of some of his designs, like with the cars that he has, he can just update the software, send it all to all the different vehicles. And now they have new capability, new functions.
That's a huge point right there. That's a huge point because, that was one of the mind-blowing things for me of changing the way I was thinking about this stuff. People get so hung up on EV versus gas vehicles, et cetera, and they get into this political debate, all that. But when you just think of it from a principles perspective, back in 1995, whoever had, not that many people had cell phones, but the people that did, it wasn't even a concept that you could update them, right? It was, you buy a product, you have the product, now you have the product, right? Anybody who plays a modern video game circa 2025 knows that when you're buying a video, this is for better and worse. You're buying a video game, that's not a finite or a finished necessarily piece of software. That's something that you might be playing Call of Duty in January, and then in April, it's a new game because they implement an update, an over-the-air update. Now, for probably the easiest example of this that most normal people have interfaced with over the last couple decades is something like iPhones and computers. People now kind of understand that there's software updates. You might buy an iPhone 10, but then there's 5 different updates that you get over the next 3 years, and it changes the software. But to your point, it's almost like you don't even think about it being possible or that principle being applied to a different system until somebody does it, right? Like, we're walking around, we're driving around with cell phones on the dashboard, and the cars are updating to interface with the phone, right? Any car you buy now has charging pads. It has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's got speakerphone and all this kind of stuff, right? But the vehicle itself cannot be updated unless you bring it to a dealer. Now I know you can do that, and they can charge you $150 and run an analog software update through it and all that kind of stuff, right? But if you're driving a Tesla around and you're using self-driving technology and it's a 7 out of 10 in terms of quality, and you bought it 5 years ago, well, FSD version 13 comes out this month and you get it. And now your car, the thing that drives you around, is a different thing now. It has changed its function. And just that first principles approach to engineering of taking a system that disrupted the entire communications and cell phone and internet industry and just going, hey, what if we just did that, but with transportation? Those kinds of ideas, which is why people like us do let our minds wander down those paths of plans of how much of this is just an organic guy figuring some shit out, and how much of it is more of a, like you said, the parallel system idea.
Yeah, just one more note on that. As you were talking, I remembered our conversation with Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy and how he had written the book, The Mobile Wave, like in 2013 or whatever it was. And it was very much forward thinking. And he could see like, hey, everyone's going to have a cell phone in their pocket. And hey, I could probably create a software company that's going to leverage that. And that's kind of how he got to be in his space. And he just had a lot of foresight to him because he was an engineer. And he understood systems, and that's what it teaches you. And then I guess one more thing to kind of talk about system of systems, and you mentioned power projection and the different types of power projection. I think you have to understand the different layers of warfare. And so there's like spiritual warfare and spiritual battlefield and physical warfare and the physical battlefield. You mentioned cognitive war space with like the narrative deployments and abstract power projection. And then, now we've transitioned to this digital age where we even have to consider electronic and cyberspace power projection. Like, Bitcoin is what we say, from a software perspective. But that's why I come to those conclusions where like I'm a Christ maximalist. I'm, I love holding down like the stalemate, if you will. Like I don't want to see the kinetic warfare aspect of it. I believe we're fighting 5th generation warfare and we're controlling the narrative. And then I'm a soft war maximalist. I see all of those different areas of warfare, and then I'm looking for systems that are winning in each one of those areas or that have the potential to win because it ebbs and flows over time.
Right. As Mrs. Bright says here, you do not play that game tonight. You will not survive. System is the drinking word. Very well said. I promise we are getting to the Doge thing. Last thing before we talk about Doge in particular. I guess on a broad level, it's interesting how you lay out the different forms of power projection. To me, if you want to know, like you said, you need to know how something works in order to take it apart. This will transition us into the Doge conversation. I think that's pretty apparent. I mean, I came from the combat sports world. What are martial arts? They are systems of physical combat. Karate is a system of physical combat. Shotokan karate is a system within the system of karate. Western boxing, the Philly shell, is a specific type of Western boxing. Kung Fu is Chinese, right? You've got all these systems. Russian Sambo, mixed martial arts. The reason it was innovative wasn't because it created a rule set and applied it to martial arts. It took rules away from combat sports and said, what would happen if we took a systems engineer, also known as a boxer, a punching systems engineer, and we put him up against a kicking systems engineer? Well, what happens is people learn how to punch and kick. And then what happens when you put a wrestler into MMA? Well, he takes everybody down. Well, now the systems engineer that was just a puncher has to learn how to wrestle. And then you've got a new system that is the combination of the three, right? And if you don't understand how these systems interface, you end up with a Marine, which is a kinetic system, right? That man, a node within a kinetic power projection system. And then if he doesn't understand, or you don't understand that there's narrative power, there's political system, there's a financial system, then yeah, you could perfect war fighting in a physical domain. But what does that matter if the warfighting units are then deployed against the wrong enemy? Because you didn't consider the other systems, right? So I wanted to, one more question I had for you before Doge is with all that said, why do humans gravitate towards systems? And do you think that the enemy, that the deep state, or just bad people in general, do you think they've taken advantage of that? Or is this kind of a byproduct? You know, like, is this an intentional weaponization of systems and taking advantage of human lack of understanding of systems? Or do you think it's a separate issue, altogether?
So I would answer the first part with, I believe systems in and of themselves are first principle. Everything is a system. And so it's only logical that we think in systems and we gravitate towards systems. And then I believe when you understand that and you understand the different layering, and like you said, with the Prussiagate thing, like they didn't just come to a system of systems right away. They chipped away at it and they had to capture each system. And then before you know it, they could integrate at that higher level. But that, I think, was how the deep state got to be so successful, is they understood, like, hey, this is a system. Central banking is a system. And like Rothschild said, right, if I control the money, I don't care who writes the laws. He knew that about the system. He knew the power of the incentive structure of that system and how it could be exploited, right? The logic that was built into the system could be exploited to cause the government system to be rendered ineffective or controllable. And so they see the advantages, like you were saying, with mixed martial arts. Once they started pitting those systems together, they were learning the whole way. And they found what works and they captured those things. And before you know it, we have this deep state system that is like tremendously hard to counteract. And I think Q mentioned that perfectly when he described it as a pyramid. There's three sides to this pyramid. You know, we have a system here, we have a system here, we have a system here, and together they make this system of systems and this higher form of structure that's even harder to take down. And so it was a long road to get there, but I really like that MMA analogy of, I think what they did was build a system of systems. They integrated all those separate systems.
Yep, and constantly looking for new efficiencies and all that kind of stuff. We're gonna transition now to talking about Doge, which is top of mind, and just, you know, what Trump 2.0 is doing so far on both a narrative and, with Sean here, an actual level. We're talking about some actuals tonight, which makes me uncomfortable, but I think it's worth talking about. Before we do, though, I want to shout out the main sponsor of tonight's show. We really appreciate them sponsoring the show. They've been sponsoring us for a few weeks now, and that is our friends at the formerly EasyRx, now known as Save Pulse. Save Pulse is committed to keeping you and your family healthy with top quality medications like amoxicillin, azithromycin, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and more. Our ordering process is streamlined for your convenience. We pride ourselves on offering unbeatable prices. Now's the time to prepare for any health scenario. Head over to badlandsmedia.tv/meds. Stock up on essential antibiotics and viral care medications. Ensure you're ready for anything by visiting badlandsmedia.tv/meds. And don't forget to use the promo code BADLANDS at checkout to get a 10% discount on orders over $150. That's badlandsmedia.tv/meds. Promo code BADLANDS. Save on your health essentials today. Very much appreciate Save Pulse sponsoring the show. And as we say all the time, besides being funded by you guys for everything being free here, we are funded by those sponsors who choose to put up or shut up with us. We really appreciate their support. When you support them, you're supporting us. So Doge, Sean, I want to talk about Doge. It's fascinating to me. Talked about it quite a bit from a narrative perspective, which we can touch on, but the narrative of this show is systems, right? And just wherever you want to go with it, you sitting there as a systems engineer, who's the rare systems engineer who is in the info war, who understands what the deep state is, who understands what the America First movement is, Q-op, all of it. What do you think of Doge and how it's being implemented, what it's targeting, given everything we're talking about with systems? Wherever you want to go with it, just what do you think about it so far? And did you see it coming in the way that it's been deployed so far?
So I'll answer the last part first. Did I expect it to come that way? I kind of didn't, right? Like G and I, we spent a long time really analyzing the narrative warfare from the perspective of a bunch of it was just like rugs. Like, it was just all of these narrative, psychological operations that didn't have any actuals. And so I almost was hesitant to believe that there would be actuals, especially coming from an eccentric cipher such as Elon Musk. And, was he going to team up with the other eccentric cipher, Trump, and were they going to go do warfare together? And then once it happened, it's like, okay, is this just narrative warfare or will there be actuals? And so, as I'm sitting in my contractor role and I'm getting all these emails with, the DOD's, signature on it, that's like, hey, we're done with this. Hey, DEI is dead. Hey, everybody give me your email and tell me what you did last week. Hey, and it's causing all this chaos.
And you are seeing that, by the way, because some people in this community may not know that, but you meant like you are seeing this in that world, right?
Oh yeah, no more abortions, no more transgenders, like DEI is dead. Everybody's got to come to work. All that stuff is real, and it's causing our government civilians to go absolutely apeshit, especially if they have some reason to believe that they can't cut it in this new proof of work environment. I think that's what we're ultimately implementing is you don't work, you're going to have a hard time eating, right? There's been a lot of people who have been eating and they haven't done a lot of work, right? It's a proof of stake system.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
Right. And so a great way that you can think about tonight is we are fighting a proof of stake system with a proof of work system.
Can you explain before you go further on Doge, go further on Doge, but because that is said a lot. Proof of work, I think, is fairly intuitive to understand. I don't think a lot of people who are not have not gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole understand intuitively proof of stake. So outside of a Bitcoin context, what do you mean by proof of stake, and why are we currently in a proof of stake system?
Yeah, proof of stake can be described a lot of different ways. In terms of the system that I see, they'll call it like stakeholder capitalism, right? They even admit that I got a bunch of stakeholders. And so you think of something like the central bank, or the Federal Reserve, it's not federal and it's got no reserves, but it's got a board of directors. And so you can think about it in the same sense with the voting apparatus in our elections. It's this abstraction of power up to higher and higher levels, right? And so you're centralizing all of that control upwards, whereas proof of work is receipts at the bottom, right? You're seeing the proof of work at the bottom, and everybody has an equitable amount, or egalitarian amount of stake in that system. And so that's kind of how I see it. You look at the deep state and it's like everything's run by these handful of globalists, right? And so that's a proof of stake system. It didn't matter what anybody did at the bottom, didn't matter what they told you, it didn't matter what you believe. Your power was being taken away at the high levels, and they didn't have to do any work just because they created an abstract system. And maybe that's a bad way to describe some of that, but it's at least what I came up with today. And then proof of work is different, because it requires receipts, it requires sauce, it requires you to put energy in. And a good example of that, and this is a first principle law, of nature, is reaping and sowing, right? You should, in all senses, get what you work for. If you don't plant the seeds, you don't water the seeds, you shouldn't eat the food, right? It's a very biblical principle, first principle kind of thing. And what, if you think about like our enemy and how they've pointed everything at us, and I believe it's an evil system at its core, is they're perverting every first principle that's been put in place by God, right? They're perverting the nuclear family. They're perverting our identity. They're perverting reaping and sowing. And so socialism is a perversion of the law of God, right? In terms of you got to work to eat. And so they say, hey, we are going to take your work and we're going to give it to these people who don't eat. And then they can create an abstract power hierarchy around that. And that abstract power hierarchy is the proof of stake system. It puts them in the spot because they can control and manage the resources without your permission to give them power that they shouldn't have. And so I think that's why Doge is so important, because when they come down, go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say, and related to Doge, is like when they're coming down and they're saying like, hey, government civilian, show me your receipts or you don't get to eat. it's very important and different than, hey, here's your paycheck and we trust you, or hey, you don't have to do any work and we're still going to give you the paycheck. When they're shutting down like the USAID, or when they're going to go audit Fort Knox, and we can talk about any of them in more detail, they're removing the trust that has been abused, right? The exploitation vectors, they're counteracting that system that's been constructed.
Now, you mentioned it, so we might as well touch on it. I think I mentioned this on Wednesday night. I've put out a couple tweets on it. Probably brings a tear to the in a good way to the Bitcoin maxis' eyes when I do so. Now, I don't tell anybody what to do. I've invested in gold. I've invested in silver. Not saying that those things are not viable. But on the Fort Knox deployment, related to Doge and Trump obviously signal boosted this. You know what? Let me just play the video here of Donnie.
We're going to go into Fort Knox to make sure the gold is there.
Are they going to?
You know that we're going to go into Fort Knox. Do you know about that?
Sir,
That was a bad bump.
Are they going to eliminate more national security positions, civilians there?
We'll see what happens. But one of the things we do want to look, I mean, we hope everything's fine with Fort Knox, but we're going to go to Fort Knox, the fabled Fort Knox, to make sure the gold is there.
Where would the gold have gone?
If the gold isn't there, we're going to be very upset.
So obviously people saw that, Elon's talking about Fort Knox, and rewinding a little bit, you and I have mentioned, you use the word cipher. I use that applied to Elon and Trump all the time in my writing, cognitive ciphers. That doesn't mean actuals aren't happening, but it means that I think they're being translated in a very bombastic way, signal boosted. We talk about signal and the noise. How do you get everybody in the country talking about a Fort Knox audit? You probably have Elon tweeting about it and asking his audience, hey guys, do you think we should do this thing that obviously all of you think we should do, right? What's he doing? He's generating consensus as part of a consensus protocol. What's Trump doing there? He's signal boosting it. And I want to pass this to you, but I think a lot of people are missing the signal in the noise here with Fort Knox. And I think it comes down to the word that you just used a few times, trust. Now, it's hard to talk about Fort Knox without talking about either gold or Bitcoin, right? You talk about, you go against gold perceptively and gold bugs freak out at you. You start only talking about Bitcoin as being the solution to everything, and people who don't understand it freak out at you, right? But aside from that, I think, to me, when we're talking about tonight, diagnosing problems with systems, right? That's kind of how you understand them. So I think people are missing the forest for the trees here, and they're focusing on whether or not the gold is there. Where I think what they should be focusing on is whether or not the gold is there. Put another way, whether the gold is there or not is a distant second point to me about the fact that we are all asking whether or not the gold is there, right? And like gold maxis are going like, half of them say if it's not there, gold's going to shoot up because like it'll be more scarce. Half of them are saying if it is there, it's going to shoot up because we're going to revalue to gold. Get that conversation out of your head. It's not as important. What's important from where I'm sitting, and I want your feedback on, is has that system worked if we require trust in a president and his administration telling us whether or not the thing is there? And to me, if you're going down that path and you're saying, well, we trust Trump and Elon Musk, and they're saying it is or isn't there, right? You trust their ledger that they're giving you. Okay, what happens in 20 years when you've got some other administration in there? We're just going to do this again, where we just trust whoever's telling us what's in Fort Knox. To me, that's what it's about. It's about the fact that we have a trust-based system, right? And I'm sure I'm not going to get any argument from you, but maybe you can describe it, in your own way.
No, that's a very valid point, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I've written a little bit about this in a Substack titled "Trust the Plan." The plan that the deep state used, the system that they built against us, was one that abused our trust. And so when I mentioned stakeholder capitalism, it implies that you have given your stake to someone else to hold. You have trusted them that they're going to do the right thing on your behalf. And that's just not the case. And we've seen it time and time again in history and central banking is a great example of this, right? They always boost confidence by showing you, hey, here's some gold in Fort Knox. And before you know it, you have $35 trillion in debt, right? Because they've abused your trust. And you're absolutely right. The fact that we have to ask where the gold is proof positive that it's a proof of stake system. It's not a proof of work system, even though there's some proof of work required in developing the gold itself. And that's a different topic too, where it's like Bitcoin is proof of work, but we always have to be vigilant moving forward of what we build around and on top of it, or it could be used in a bad fashion as well. Like first principles, it's not a slave system. But what could be built around it could make it a slave system. You never know, right?
One note on that. Note on that is I just saw it today and thought it was incredible, even though, again, people get mad, whatever. Mark Moss, who I know you know, and I know G knows him, he summed it up so well with Fort Knox, where he said, we're talking about a ledger of gold, right? We're talking about who controls the ledger. Is the ledger accurate or not? Are there any actual assets on the ledger? Where he said Bitcoin is the audit.
Right.
So we're talking about auditing gold. We're talking about auditing Fort Knox. The way Bitcoin works is that every 10 minutes a new block is minted, and that block is an audit on the entire blockchain, right? So that's a lot of people I don't think quite understand that and why Bitcoin people talk about it that way. Where, like you said, with being vigilant, we could want to be vigilant all we want when it comes to Fort Knox. But you and I have no way of applying that vigilance to the accounting of gold in Fort Knox. Even if Donald Trump shows us where it all is. If he shows us and somehow proves what is or isn't in Fort Knox on Monday, by Tuesday, we will not be able to trust what we were shown on Monday because the audit is already out of date. The audit is no longer valid on Tuesday because, as we've seen in the infamous photo op in Fort Knox, which was masquerading as an audit in and of itself.
Yeah, that's a great point. Bitcoin provides an update to the ledger every 10 minutes that's available for anybody to see. I can go into my node today and look at the entire Blockchain Explorer and see where every single Bitcoin is, right? All of the wallets that hold it, I might not know who they are, right? But I can see, hey, there's 19.5 million Bitcoin that are out there that have been mined. And I know that they're distributed in this fashion. I know exactly where they've moved or how they've moved over time. Even if I don't know where in physical time and space, I know where the Bitcoin is. The ledger is there. And to your point, yeah, if they show me something on a TV screen, that doesn't mean very much, right? In the world of everything is fake, like, is the gold that they're showing me on the fake TV screen real or not? I don't know, right? And like you said, how long does it take for the gold to move? Who is auditing those movements? How are they reporting those to the consumer? Like, there's just no reasonable way, in my opinion, that you could do that. Like last time I checked, all the gold coins and gold bars have serial numbers on them. What the hell is that for? Right? It was originally supposed to be an audit mechanism so that they could track the gold and all of that. And maybe they did at some point, but it's so hard to verify the average American's not going to be able to tell whether a gold coin is real or not. Right. Yeah. And so even if we took our stake back and we said, okay, we're done with Fort Knox, we're going to self-custody our gold. Everybody's going to go to McDonald's and try to figure out how to split a gold coin for some hamburgers. Like, even if we did that, it still would be a ledger that is vulnerable to exploitation, right? Because you can introduce the counterfeits, right? You can't counterfeit Bitcoin. And so it's got so many properties that improve upon gold. It's almost like somebody looked at the gold system and said, hey, this was the best we ever had. How do we improve upon it to have an even better system? And then they did it.
Yeah, well said. And even and back to Doge, Fort Knox prompted this, but applying it, I'm curious what you think about applying it to the larger framework of Doge with that key word being trust. What do you think? Do you think that Trump and Elon Musk are attempting to generate this conversation that we're having right now? Not just with Fort Knox, but on a macro, with the government.
Yeah, I think absolutely. In all cases, we have outsourced our trust to doctors, to weathermen, to central bankers. And so these narrative deployments, I believe, are designed to get everybody to understand that, hey, we've given our personal responsibility away. We've given our trust to these other people. And over time, alongside of that, it's kind of like double fold. It's like, one, they're trying to get you to realize you've given your trust to somebody, and then two, that they've abused that trust. And once you come to those two understandings, you can now see the system. And so they're trying to awaken people in these different areas. So it's like, hey, I've always taken whatever pill my doctor says without a second thought. And now I'm going to find out that, hey, one, I was taking that without any critical thinking. And two, they were trying to kill me, even if the doctor themselves didn't realize that, right? Because the higher system of systems was trying to keep us sick and keep us, taking more pharmaceuticals and taking vaccines so that we could generate profit for them. And same with the central bankers and how much money they've printed, and same with the politicians and how much they've laundered away from us. And so I think it's all of that, really. And that's, I think, what gets me so excited about Doge is it's almost like, hey, we're actually going to make progress in this awakening, right? It's no more anons on these back channels and us screaming, into the wind of, hey, you need to pay attention to this. It's more being force fit from the top and saying like, hey, we're going to your point, use the system of old against itself, and we're going to use its repeating node patterns through like mainstream channels or through the internet, and we're going to communicate those messages that way also. And so we're kind of pincer moving it from a narrative perspective, because we've been holding up the bottom and they're going to come in from the top, we'll sandwich it, and everybody will eventually come to know that, yeah, we've been hacked, right?
Yeah, and speaking of, you mentioned the central bankers there, and relevant to this conversation, couple names we're talking about tonight. Let's hear very quickly what they think about the central bankers in the context of this this new administration.
Are you thinking about auditing the Federal Reserve as well, which is obviously
yeah, sure,
regulates our economy?
So that's a soft one there, right? And then we got another name here that I see everybody in chat talking about tonight. Very excited by.
So I think we got to educate people that the Federal Reserve is not a public government entity. It's a private entity owned by the robber barons that started this country, who manipulate the currency to their advantage. And that needs to be tackled. Again, I'm not the economic guru. I just know it's a problem. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the solution is, but it needs to be addressed.
Now, forgive me, Sean, I want your feedback on this. I'm going to play that Cash clip again. And not to be like a teacher here, but I want you in the audience to think about, what is Cash's role right now? What is his public role? What is his literal, actual role in the United States? And how does he characterize the Federal Reserve? And now listen to the clip again.
So I think we got to educate people that the Federal Reserve is not a public government entity. It's a private entity owned by the robber barons that started this country, who manipulate the currency to their advantage. And that needs to be tackled. Again, I'm not the economic guru. I just know it's a problem. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the solution is, but it needs to be addressed.
Very good observation.
You sent that clip over. So tell me about what you're thinking. Federal Reserve, Kash Patel, Trump 2.0, Fort Knox. Where does your mind go when you see all of these things hitting the war of stories at the same time, and especially the way that Kash Patel communicates about the Federal Reserve? You sent that clip over.
Yeah, like you said, his role, director of the FBI, so Federal Bureau of Investigations. I liked how he is explicit that the Federal Reserve is not federal. And so I think he's identifying like, hey, if we went and investigated this federal entity, we would find that it's not federal. And that would have implications. And then to your point, he used the term education. I think all of these folks are really in this education role, and they're communicating these same stories in different ways as it relates to different audiences. Like Kash has a different following than Elon. And so those same stories are being permeated, but they're using them in different ways. And so that's kind of how I saw it. What did you see?
Well, I totally agree with all of that for sure. it struck me, I had listened to that before the show, and it just wasn't, just because of the direction our conversation took, it hit me differently watching it while we're on the show. While we're on the show, it's hitting me that the words he's using there, he calls them the robber barons, right? Now he ends the clip, to your point, by saying like, hey, I don't know what the solution is. Like, I'm not an economic guy, right? So I'm not an economic guy. I'm just Kash Patel. I don't know what the solution is for the Federal Reserve. But besides what you said, that he's saying, hey, it's not federal, it's not a reserve. We've heard that in this community. Who is Kash Patel right now? In a kindergarten level approach, who is Kash Patel? He is the #1 cop in the United States of America. He is very literally the #1 cop in the United States. How did he just describe the Federal Reserve? The most powerful robbers in the United States. Now, there's a game that many American children used to play on playgrounds called Cops and Robbers. And it just hits me differently now of going, might Kash Patel actually have something to have a little bit more of a part to play in the story of the Federal Reserve than just Doge doing audits, etc., right? Like, might the world's most powerful cops start to take a look at the world's most powerful robbers?
I like that, playing cops and robbers, and this time maybe for real. And yeah, I think to you and General Quas, and we mentioned it today, all of this is generating that conversation space and the debate space. And so like when Trump throws something out or Elon throws something out and it gets Bitcoin maximalists to go crazy, or it gets, altcoin maximalists to get all hyped, like it's causing these conversations. And I think that that's where the real magic happens. Cause like you said, they're using those conversations and debate space to generate consensus to then go take action. And it can really only move as fast as that Overton window moves. And I think Doge is an acceleration to that. And also I'm of the opinion that pretty much everything we see nowadays with our enemy, the robbers, has been relegated to humiliation ritual. They're just going through these motions as their system is dying, and they're playing a part also in terms of helping that system die. Like, that's just my opinion on that.
Yeah. I want to know too, before we transition into our theme on Doge. First of all, wherever else you want to go with Doge, anything else you want to say about it, but I'll prompt you with this. As an engineer, as somebody who's been in the info war, participating in the info war for years, what do you think, how would you describe how Doge and Trump 2.0, how the mission is structured? That's a big one. But, how is Doge being structured, whether that's on narrative or actual levels? How is Trump 2.0 being structured in terms of the mission? How do you think the mission is being structured when it comes to specifically the dismantling of the system, or maybe it's not the dismantling of the system. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's the reform of the system. What do you see so far, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, as I see it, is it's the addition of actuals with narrative. And so this time we're actually seeing some actuals coming down. I have tangible evidence that there's been action taken, right? A lot of times we'll see things on TV and I never know, right, hey, did that really happen or not? Like, right, it sounds good. It sounds like somebody did something, but the voting stuff was a pretty good example of that. We hear all these good news stories and somebody stopped some fraud and, we got a new way to vote. And at the end of the day, it's the same fake system, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how I see the difference of Trump 2.0 and even Doge. And I think Doge is just an arm of Trump 2.0 in terms of all these deployments. And then the how, what I see when I look at Elon Musk and Doge and even Trump at the larger fashion, like with tariffs and you mix in all the geopolitics, is we're hitting the system of system at all of its systems. Right. You see in 3 weeks, we're auditing every single federal organization, which touches finance. And you got Robert Kennedy over here who's going to be overhauling and doing the MAHA thing. And so it's very much like, hey, they fully understand this thing. They know exactly how they're going to go dismantle it, and it's time to go. At least in my opinion, that's what I see. Now it's like, are the grocery prices at my local grocery store down? Have we solved inflation? Are we out of a fake money system? There's still a lot of actuals to come, right? We'll see what happens, with things like the Diddy list or the Epstein list, right? These, what we would call rugs that have just circled and circled and circled. And Q said that it's important to have these things circle and at larger and larger magnitude, because that's waking more and more people up, people who might have missed it before. It keeps the focus on. Every time you make it a little bit bigger, people get excited and they hook back into it. They're psychological operations in a sense, and they're driving behavior of the people along that Overton window to help us move it so that we can actually go do the things that we need to do. Like I was saying with the strangler pattern, I think that's part of what Doge is. It's an aspect of a strangler pattern where we're just slowly wrapping ourselves around the system. And at some point you're going to find, DEI was on the tail end of it's dead. And so it's gone. But, maybe we're going to wrap around the IRS here. Maybe we're going to wrap around the Federal Reserve. And there's going to be this like window where these things are kind of like in the focus and they're being talked about and debated about. And before you know it, things are just going to be different. Like, it's going to happen over time. I don't expect any dramatic things. I think this is a multi-year effort that we're going to endure. But at the end of it, it's going to look like an entirely different world. And you're going to say, what happened? It's kind of like when the internet was all of a sudden a thing. And then, 5 years later, everybody's got smartphones and we don't think nothing of it. It's like, I can still remember the caveman days where, it was like 56K dial up and somebody calls you and it kicks you off your Diablo game. Right? Like, what the heck? Like, don't call me. I'm playing Diablo.
Diablo is a fantastic game. Diablo 2 in particular. You mentioned, I like the strangler pattern analogy there. When you mentioned too the rugs, we've gone back and forth on this. You and I, me and G, even me and Chris. I totally. It's funny because sometimes it's like you can argue past each other. Where I've long said basically what you just did of the rug pulls are there, and they seem to be for a purpose. When you mentioned Q, one of the ways I characterize it is something I call the shark fin template. So, if you use the movie Jaws, it's the reason it holds up so well, even if the animatronic shark doesn't all that much, is that it's considered a masterclass narratively in tension building. And it's often used in writing classes to demonstrate how bad modern writing is when it comes to scary movies or tense movies or thrillers or anything like that, any of these kinds of stories. The reason being, 2025 horror movies, as many people in this audience are aware, and as General Quast actually mentioned last week, they're shocking. They're not good. They're not clever. They're not smart. They're not tense. They're gory. They're bloody. They're shocking. So when you can't write and you want to make a horror movie or a thriller, what do? You do something totally shocking that nobody's ever seen. Somebody's been torn apart by chainsaws in your last horror movie, tear them apart by chainsaws and feed them to dogs in the next one, right? Like, it's just shock value. Where the brilliance of Jaws is there's like 2 death scenes in a 2-hour movie, but the tension that it builds throughout. For the first hour of the movie, you don't see the shark. In the second hour, you see his fin. In the last half an hour, in the first hour, you get one glimpse of him to go, oh, it's real, it's there. And the reason I bring all that up is I think we're in a war of stories. I think we're winning it. I think there are writers of the story. So when I look at the rug pulls and like the Epstein, the Diddy and everything, I see Epstein as the shark fin template. Patriots are going, hey, this is how dark things are. Whoop, it's back under the surface, right? But everyone now knows the shark is there. Everyone in the world, literally everyone in the world now knows that elite sex trafficking rings exist. And then a couple years later, P. Diddy comes up above the surface, right? And to me, this is more of a faith-based approach. This has not been actualized yet. But I think that we are building toward the attack scene, and in a good way. We're building toward, hey, we've told you the shark's in the water. We've shown you glimpses that the shark's in the water. We're trying to get everyone on the beach aware that the shark's in the water. And then when the shark is there, hopefully enough people have been prepped to absorb the reality of the situation when this stuff is fully disclosed. That's kind of how I've seen it.
Yeah, it's a great analogy also. And I would agree wholeheartedly that there's a lot of hard truth still to come. I think a lot of people, if you go talk to 100 people, you're going to get 100 different positions on where they're at in this war of stories. And most people are still pretty far left from where we're at. And so they still need the baby gloves, right? They still need those tense scenes, and they need this shiny, Elon with the chainsaw to get them to look at something, because they haven't yet restructured their lives as like maybe a Bitcoin maximalist would have done, because they haven't seen the system. They haven't seen that, hey, maybe I should stop watching that. Hey, maybe I should stop believing that blindly. Hey, maybe I should go do this instead. And so we're still, in a large sense, it's kind of scary sometimes of how slow some of it's been, is waking people up. And I think most people, to your point, are there. I think they know it. I think they've seen it, and they've kind of like internalized that, hey, maybe this scary shark is in the water. But I don't believe they've come to the point of admitting it yet. And so I think that's the hurdle we need to get over, is we need them to admit that there are sharks and they're real. And then once we get them to admit that, maybe there's some desire to go harpoon the shark.
Well said. And to stretch this analogy even further, I would describe, Bitcoin maximalists talk about you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. I've taken that and often applied it to everything else, right? You get the truth at the price you deserve. You get freedom at the price you deserve. When it comes to something like Jaws, the way I see truthers, maximalists, etc., is they are Martin Brody. They are Roy Schneider's character there, where, like you said, the shark is in the water. This is the reality of the situation. The deep state is here. The deep state is real. It's as bad as everybody's ever told you it is. Now, when you don't know that, and you haven't been told that or shown it, it's not your fault, right? You're a victim of the system. You're a victim of the shark. The girl at the beginning of the movie doesn't know that the shark is there. She gets jacked. Once Brody tells everybody on the beach that the shark is there, and then some of them go swimming anyway, that's, I think, when you get some of this, right? Where I think both can be true. I think it can be true that we're watching a plan. I think it can be true that Patriot's in control to some degree. And I think it can be true that, there are rug pulls. There are people who aren't going to make it, maybe not aren't going to make it completely, but they're not going to make it on the timeline that they could have made it. They're not going to be rewarded. They're gonna live in tension a lot longer. They might get jacked by a shark right on the way there. And hey, we told you. We in this community told you the shark was there. So,
yep, that's a great pulling the thread on that analogy, and you're absolutely right. I think that everybody's had plenty of opportunity. I mean, like you just think like something like Bitcoin. Like I was, quote, late to the game, even though I was extremely early. Right.
But
it's like, that's how you feel.
I felt late to the game. I felt very late to the game. Yeah.
And like at 100,000, you're like, oh, I'm late to the game. But you hear somebody like Eric Trump talk about, hey, when this thing overtakes gold, which they talk about it like as if it's happened already, it's going to be $750,000 a coin, right? So there's like a 7.5x from here if it's going to overtake gold, which they believe is going to happen. And then you talk like Michael Saylor and I think Jason Lowry, they're like $100 million coin, like as it's far, maybe it's 2140, but like this is generational wealth. And so you gotta realize the need for it. You got to understand the system, and then you have to become sovereign so that you can fight against that system in that area. And so, yeah, just really good. And I hope people are slowly paying attention. And, I always get, calls at this point. Well, at least when it was going up this last time, they're like, hey, I hear you're into Bitcoin or whatever, should I buy XRP? And it's like, they don't even get it yet. Right.
Yeah. It's the Kamala Harris campaign supporting XRP.
The proof of stake coin. Right. It's like, they're not yet understanding of the system. And so they're so easily capable of replacing the old system with a new old system, right? And it's like, if we wanted the centralization, we would just use the CBDC, right? Which I think is what XRP might be good for.
Well, that's what I'm a lot newer to this world, but I sort of had discerned that as a potential and talked to Sean and G about that behind the scenes of going, man, if I were to design a CBDC, it would probably look a lot like this. And then you've got Trump out there not banning, but saying, communicating his intent to prevent CBDCs from happening. You just mentioned, though, what transitions us into next leg of our discussion, which is systems and sovereignty. Something I've used, something I've explored in my writing for years, something I think about a lot is those two words, systems and sovereigns, and reconciling those two concepts, those two first principles, those two terms. Before we get into that, I guess, just as we did in the first part of the show, talking about systems, how would you define sovereignty? Because it's another word that we use all the time, and I would say that the connotation of that word in this community is overwhelmingly positive. Seems to be the thing that if you're looking for a first principle of the truth community besides truth, it would probably be sovereignty, right? So how would you define it, and how do we see it operating in the world, or what's the state of sovereignty right now in the world?
The state of sovereignty in the world is pretty bad right now. And I believe it harkens back to our proof of stake discussion, in that we've outsourced our control. And I would define sovereignty as control, having power, having freedom to act. Those are kind of the three things I would use tonight. There's lots of ways to describe it, but we have relegated all of our control and our power and our authority to someone else. And so we are no longer sovereign over our lives, right? Somebody controls my bank account. Somebody controls the interest rates. Somebody controls what medicines I'm able to take, what vaccines my kids are supposed to have. Like, somebody's making all of those decisions. And not only that, they've constructed a system that it's like the law, right? And I'm forced to do it. And so, like, a gang comes into your neighborhood and takes over, that neighborhood is no longer sovereign. They're no longer free to act and behave like a neighborhood. They have to get with the program, if you will. And so in terms of like systems and sovereigns, I would say your system, at least in a proof of stake network, or, like different, they have sovereigns over them, right? They have God kings, is what we call them, right? Like little g God kings. And so like your president of the United States would be your little g God king, like Trump with the crown on the Time magazine, right? Which is kind of funny. He's the God king over the system of America as it is geopolitically or governmentally. And so if you start to think about things like that, you're like, okay, how much trust am I giving to Trump? How much of my sovereignty am I giving to Trump? Whereas I think very interesting things that have happened in history are things like, and we can talk more about this later even, but like Christ decentralized a centralized power hierarchy.
Yeah.
He took.
I want to end on that. End on that topic, but keep that in mind, people.
And so there's that one, and then Bitcoin does the same thing with the financials. And so Bitcoin is decentralizing. And so we are getting our power back as those centralized systems are then deconstructed, right? I have spiritual power projection through Christ. I have financial freedom through Bitcoin, right? And therefore I can operate against the system that was constructed against us in those two warfighting domains because I have the sovereignty. And so it would be like in the physical sense, I have sovereignty over my property, maybe because I own a lot of guns, right? And I know how to use them, right? I have taken that control, that power into my own hands. I self-custody those things so that I can project power in that domain. And the same thing with, let's say, I guess Bitcoin's the example also in some digital sense, but, things like, your different virus protection scanners, your VPN, your maybe Tor browser, they're giving you digital sovereignty by obfuscating the footprint or doing different things to identify risks in that area so that you can be free to act, free to move. And so those are, I guess, sovereignty and sovereigns and systems kind of in a nutshell there from Pip.
Yeah. So what I'm really interested in is the dichotomy or competition between those two first principles. On a first principles basis, in this world, when we're in the info war, when we're talking about the problem with the system, when we're talking about the system of systems, as we discussed in most of the show so far. And then on the other hand, we're always talking about sovereignty, the American Revolution, probably these days the most famous and relevant sovereign movement that we could probably think of. There's been others, there will be others, but certainly that's the most famous, I would say. I don't think anybody would argue that the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers weren't focused on sovereignty and overcoming that monarchy system. But with all that said, the title that I titled the theme and thesis section here in my notes is Sovereign Systems. Not sovereign, systems. Sovereign systems. I wonder, what do you think about how systems have been used to subvert, to suffocate, to stifle sovereignty versus are these two concepts, are these two principles antithetical to each other? Are they diametrically opposed at a principle's root level? Or could they be used in concert with each other? Can you have, in other words, can there be such a thing as a sovereign individual, which is also the name of an famous book, and can there be a sovereign system? Can there be systems built on top of that don't threaten the sovereignty of that individual? I wonder just kind of what you think about that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Like you said, there's some paradoxical thinking that'll go on inside of that. And I don't know that you ever get to the desired state in some of this. I just don't. The world's dynamic. The world's got good and evil in it. They're always warring. You're going to have tit for tat in terms of your enemies. Like, let's say we get to the end state here. Are we going to stay in that end state forever? Absolutely not. Generations go by, people forget things, it all creeps back, new systems are built around the old systems, and we'll do this again and again and again and again, as shown throughout history. But there are certain things in society or that have happened, like we said, like Bitcoin, like Christ, and there's maybe some others that you can point to, maybe different power projection technologies that allow that space, that sector of the environment to now be that, to have a decentralized sovereign where you push that sovereignty down to the lowest level, and there's nothing that the previous sovereign can do about it outside of kill you, right? That's pretty much it. And so Bitcoin's a good example of that, where it's a system. It's absolutely a system. Right. It's the biggest computer network that we have by orders of magnitude. I think at this point in the hash rate, it's running at like 6 times the size of the nuclear navy in terms of power that is constantly being consumed to secure that ledger. And that power consumption, that power projection, as Lowry would say, is what makes it, what gives it the capability to keep me sovereign at the lowest level. Right? Because it is the system that it is, I get the sovereignty that it provides. It was designed backwards, if you will. And that's why the religious folks hated Christ so much, is because he came in and said, hey, you guys don't have to go through this priest, this pastor to get to God. You come through me, right? I have given you that power. I've torn that veil. I've broken that lever, if you will. And so now you're decentralized. He decentralized religion. And so now I don't need religion, right? Because of what he did. And so those are really the only two concrete examples, and why I think they're so interesting to write about together sometimes. Yeah. That I can find. I mean, you think like kinetic warfare, and, have we really seen something that keeps us sovereign? And, guns, sure. but it only goes so far, right? And you can build militaries around sovereign individuals to keep them slaves, even though they have guns still, as evidenced in America. And then that goes into, well, was 2A really all that effective, right? So I don't know.
Doesn't voting really hard protect your sovereignty? I was told, don't you ask permission for sovereignty, don't you?
Yeah, that's a really weird thing too, because we've gone down that rabbit hole in terms of like casting a vote is akin to a prayer, right? You're beseeching the sovereign to follow the rules of the game, of which were broken. You're saying, please do the right thing in a broken system. I'm praying to you. Please, God King, give me my freedom, right? Voting is not going to give you that freedom because you've abstracted that power. And G will talk about how like there's only like 531 representatives at the high level or something like that have the voting power. And so your vote at the ballot box is meaningless essentially because the electors in your state and then this guy with the, it gets lost.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a great point that G makes because I think it cuts through. He was talking about this on the GART stream that I was listening to that they did on Friday. I think it cuts through some of the noise of people getting sensitive about calling elections fake. People get very sensitive about that, even though they don't get sensitive about it, as Chris Paul has been pointing out, when Donald Trump sits down with Bret Baier and in so many words on the Super Bowl tells him to his face that it's ridiculous that anybody believes the results of, yes, the election that Donald Trump won. That doesn't mean that he was not the winner of the vote, of the real vote of the American people. It means that he is saying the system that we use to codify that consensus is irrevocably broken and not to be trusted. That's the only way to interpret what he's saying there. I'm not going to allow for like various interpretations of Trump saying, if you believe it, but the whole thing's ridiculous, to not be him saying, stop calling the 2024 election secure just because I won it. Like, if you have not been able to get that through your head, you have entirely missed the point of so much of what Trump is doing. So, one of the things I like about when you guys talk about the God King and everything, and even with Trump, I think that it's important to point out that the God King thing, the earnest God King thing, is something that people that don't understand what Trump is doing apply to him. But that if you understand the moves he's making and the communications he's expressing, he does not. It's not a loop there, right? Like, he is not trying to codify the God King thing. And I've said this recently on a lot of shows. One of the biggest encouraging signals to me, a first principle signal to me that goes into what we're talking about with sovereignty and with systems, came in the lead up to the 2024 election when Trump kept over and over using the word mandate. He kept saying, I need a mandate in the vote. This is a mandate election. I'm curious what you think of what he means there, because from where I'm sitting, my interpretation of it is that he's basically saying it's not about the election system. It's about, do you, the American people, support what I, your representative, am going to do on your behalf? But that's just kind of how I see him using that term.
Yeah, all great points. And I think last time I checked, our election was run on Polymarket, right? That was like
pretty much.
Right? Like, I think that was the clearest signal of who won the election. It wasn't the voting box. It wasn't what the electors said. And that was all to Trump's point. I think it's very effective sometimes, like when we call Donald Trump a God King, even though he's not behaving like one, to cause that cognitive dissonance to break down. That's part of the mimetic magic that we were trying to do sometimes, right? We were trying to cause that emotional reaction so that you would reconcile, hey, what is a God King? First, ask yourself that question. And then, why do I not want one? Why is Trump being called one? Is he one? And you would reconcile all those questions and come to conclusions like you just did. And then in terms of the mandate, I believe that he is illustrating exactly what you said. He told us in 2017 that his administration represented the return of power to the people. And so he is requesting our permission, right? Not the other way around. We're not beseeching him for permission. He's asking us, can I do this? And as the chaos happens, it only happens within the Overton window. And so he has to continually get that mandate as the Overton window shifts. He has to continually get the feedback from, that's the loop, right? That you were kind of talking about. Like, if you think about it like a production line, he's looping around every so often and saying, do I still have it? Do I still have it? Do I still have, oh, I don't have it there. I'm going to move over here. Like, and he's very fine tuning because he's the master negotiator. And I like what you say about how he does it. He anchors, right? He's taken some extreme. He's listening to the debate like you and Quast were talking about. He lets it kind of fall out, and then he'll take his position that he probably wanted anyways. Maybe he got a little bit more, but he asks and verifies, like, okay, I'm going to go do this. Do I have it? And then he'll go do that. And so it's a long, arduous process.
Yeah, to your point, I like how you put that he's asking our permission. That's a great way to think about. Again, the best ways to distill these things are down to simple first principles like that. And that is what he's doing there. I love thinking about that inauguration address in 2017, and now in this context saying he's not talking about giving something back to us. He's asking us if we want to essentially vest him with our power. And Chris has talked about this in similar terminology that you use when you said the loop. Chris has often talked about this feedback loop between Trump and the audience, as he pointed out, within that Overton window of saying, this is the battle space that Trump is operating within. And this isn't meant to be negative, but going back to the elections point, I think it's realistic and okay to point out that, to your point, if you're right, and if Donald Trump is operating on sort of a living consensus feedback mechanism within the Overton window, that is the American public, he's getting a lot of mandate, he's getting a lot of feedback at the beginning of Trump 2.0. I think that's very encouraging right now, and I think it bodes very well for the future, because I think the mandate is only increasing. I think that it's allowing the Overton window. You said a few minutes ago, in a few years, we're not even going to recognize like how the effects of these things in a positive way. That in and of itself will generate more mandate for the Overton window to accelerate further. So that's the white pill. But the black pill on a temporary basis is that for everybody who kind of freaked out and who knew the 2020 election was fake and were pissed off the whole Biden administration, if we take what you're saying about Trump's consensus protocol, then basically we're admitting, and the reason people like us, a lot of us at Badlands, get so pissed off at attempts by people to gatekeep conversations about elections and do not want us to talk about election security or election unverifiability, etc., authenticity, is that you, by doing that, are reinforcing a consensus protocol to keep a fraudulent system that Donald Trump is telling you is fraudulent. He told you the system was fraudulent in 2020. He told you the system was fraudulent in 2025 after he used it to win an election. And if you continue to defend the system, Donald Trump does not have your permission to change the system, right? And this is the paradox of the info war, and why we're never going to stop pointing that out and calling people ass clowns who get upset when we say that the election's fake, even though we're glad Trump won it, right? And I wonder what you think about that in terms of the permissions that might be going on and how people misinterpret some of that stuff.
Yeah, all valid points again. And the way I see that mandate cycle that we were talking about, at least as maybe Q described it, is it's like D5. It's like an avalanche. And so it is going to build on itself. And, every time that cycle happens, it's going to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that mandate's going to get larger. And then the snowball also moves. Consider that snowball the Overton window maybe, and it's moving along. And so he does have to continually seek us in that sense. Otherwise, you do some action. Like he just went and cut off the Federal Reserve today, and the banking system, the stock market's crashed and the system went belly up or something. He'd get a lot of flack, right? The comfortable Americans that want their free money that gets printed every Friday would go crazy. Once he gets us to the point where we recognize that the Federal Reserve is not federal and has no reserves, and they've been stealing from us through inflation constantly for the last, 113 years or so, then we will be able to take that action. And so it's unfortunate that we have to do that. However, to your point, when we have those opposing forces that say that they're on our side gatekeeping, and the gatekeeping is the opposing force, right? Not to say they're not on our side,
right?
But when you gatekeep, you control that thought space. And so if Trump is looking for the mandate in what you have gatekept, it can't happen. It cannot happen if you don't talk about the fakeness of the election, right? And so it's still a dynamic space for sure. And we do still have folks who defend aspects of the old system, the old guard, whether that's because they get power from it or money from it, or think that, you know, its change will destroy them. I don't know. I don't know what the incentives behind that are, but I know that it's dangerous to what we're looking to do here. Like if you never ever talked about child sex trafficking, you are never ever going to get a public mandate to go catch the child predators. Like you can think about it like in that simple term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great way to put it. And, you know, this is where it's been controversial in our little corner of the truth community. But, you know, there's been some tension, I think, at the advent of Trump 2.0 between, you know, it's funny. I've said this on Wednesday night. My most popular feature I ever wrote is all about the QOP. I believe that the QOP was a white hat operation. I believe it was highly effective. I believe there is a plan. You know, we've been talking about the devolution sandwich. You were talking about a pincer move. I think all of that is in play. A pincer move requires two sides to move. And if all you're doing is saying trust the plan, and I do trust the plan, but I also think that the plan is us moving forward, as you're pointing out, right? The plan doesn't happen when you bring up something like child sex trafficking. Everyone in this community probably sits there watching the show, goes, yeah, you know, he's right. We've been shouting that from the rooftops, right? Do you wait for disclosures about that to spread the gospel about what's been happening to these children? Or when you were shown the truth about things like the Epstein files, about Pizzagate, did you dig? Did you disseminate information? Did you spread that information as far and wide as you could? Did you try to hold people to account for that information, right? I think you can do both. I think we get stuck, and I see a lot of this happening in 2025. If there's one negative that I see in the truth community at the beginning of 2025, there are, Chris Paul calls them cheerleaders. There is a subset of the truth community, and a lot of them happen to be Q people, who not only want to be positive about everything, which I think is totally fine. I'm positive about everything. I'm one of the most optimistic people in this space. I think we're kicking ass. I think we're going to win. Like, we've been positive all night about all this kind of stuff. But who will shame people for talking about fake elections and talking about sex trafficking, talking about all that stuff, because they want you to trust the plan. And in their interpretation of trusting the plan means sit back, stop criticizing the system because Trump's going to fix it. Stop criticizing elections because Trump's going to fix it. No, Trump's going to fix these things because we're telling him to fix these things. And I think, as you've been pointing out in the last little bit, there needs to be a reordering of that. Trump isn't doing stuff for us. He works for us.
Right.
He works for us. He works for you. He is our employee. He is a temporary contract worker that you have hired and that you have vested with your mandate. So I just think people need to act like that more rather than, you know, just going like, oh, don't worry about our election system. It's going to be fixed. Yeah, I think it's going to be fixed too, because people are calling for it to be fixed, right?
Right. Yeah, if you believe that the system's fine or that it will get fixed and you're not calling for its fix, then it's not going to get fixed, right? And I think we've all come to that conclusion, at least most of us, that we are the plan, right? Trust the plan is to trust ourselves, that we know what's best for our own lives, right? We are discerning individuals. God has given us a brilliant supercomputer up here between our ears, and we can dissect all of these different things and come to conclusions. If we're getting all of the information and we're being honest with our critical thinking and systems analysis, we'll come to the truthful solutions, right? And that would be like, we need to go fix the elections because they're fake, right? If you're not doing that, you're not going to get there. But I think Q says this well when he talks about the key. I wrote about the key in the Kekistani Code Talkers, and it says that the key unlocks the door of all doors, and that's information. And so I think information has been given to us, right? And now we have the power to act on that information, because the stone is the force or strength capable of yielding power to act on the information. So key, information plus stone, the ability to act on that information equals the plan, right? But it's individual. They're giving us our sovereignty back at multiple levels. And so we have to take personal responsibility and use that power in the right way. Like that's the American dream right there, right? That's what this country was founded on, is we have the power. The government works for us, right? I don't look to Trump to tell me what to do. I tell Trump what to do.
Exactly.
Right? That's
Which
why
he wants.
I like, yeah, it's like Kash Patel and the FBI director is something that we have told him to do, right? Maybe not by name, but we've told him we need somebody who's going to do that job with some integrity at the top. You need to clean house. Same with the bankers. And it happens on all different levels, and it's multifaceted. And so you do get folks stuck in these microchasms, if you will, of, hey, we've won. And that was what G and I kept saying, with the election was, and I think what I concluded was Trump winning that election, which was fake, was the implicit acceptance of a significant amount of domestication, right? Essentially, we did not have the mandate to do the overhaul necessary. And so we still have to play Clown World for a while, right? Do we have to play it for another 4 years, another 8 years, another 12 years? I don't know the answer to that question, because it's a collective conscious thing. It's a collective mandate thing. And all I can do is put my one vote in.
Yeah. Right. A vote that you can't verify where it goes or who's tracking it, et cetera. And, we've talked about that a lot. I want to hit you with two more things before I let you go, because I know you got to work Monday, et cetera.
Oh, we're going? I thought we were going to get into good stuff.
Oh, no. I said I want to hit you with a few more things.
I got you.
Before I let you go. And two more things for me could be another 40 minutes. Right. So we'll see.
Yeah.
So before we get to that guy, Jesus, you mentioned, he sounds like a cool guy. That's what I want to end on.
Okay.
On this subject of sovereignty and systems, something that I've been writing about since I started in this was, Russia, the Righteous Russia series, but really the concept of the sovereign alliance. That's something that I kind of didn't come up with that alliance, but I named it that. That's kind of how I conceptualize what's going on a is there a plan on a nation state level? To me, it's an interesting way to try to gel this conversation we're having about systems and sovereigns, because the United States, Russia, China, pick your nation. Nations in and of themselves are systems, right? I mean, you could think of a nation as a system. Even before you get into the government within that nation is a system within that system. And yet, I talk about the sovereign alliance. Donald Trump talks about national sovereignty. Putin talks about national sovereignty. The EU and NATO talk about the opposite. They don't believe in national sovereignty. They think they tell you that they think that nationalism is bad. There's a term that you probably like in the Bitcoin world that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin in particular use all the time, and that is called multipolarity. They talk about moving into a multipolar world, a multipolar future. So I wonder what you think about that discussion, because it's interesting to me that we seem to understand that sovereignty is at its base level like a human individual thing, a God-given human individual thing. And yet, if we do believe in nations, if we think that there's any viability to nations, and I think that there's a good argument that there is, I think there's a good argument that pure libertarianism or anarchism is not a great path, that does not work, then is it possible to have sovereign nations? Is it possible to have and if so, how would you define that? And do you think we're moving in that direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the way that I'll answer at least part of it is, if we're going to go from a system that's wholly unsovereign, which I believe our slave system was, right? We didn't own any sovereignty in that system outside of the slave garden that they let us tend to. In order to move us to sovereign individual, which is, I believe, where a lot of us want to see us go as far towards as possible, you have to cross between sovereign nations, right? You have to get to the point where we've deconstructed globalism, and now there's a system of systems of sovereign nations, and America's America and Russia's Russia, and they're all vying for their own interests, right? They're free actors inside of that globe or whatever. And then as we do things like incorporate Bitcoin and we decentralize some of those control actions to the lower level, we will further erode the importance of the nation state, right? I'm with you, at least for maybe the next couple decades, that we're not going to go from 0 to 60 with the absolving the nation state. But over time, it's like, well, what are they going to really do for us? Like, maybe they'll provide some kinetic power projection to keep our national borders, intact. They'll keep our sovereign borders. And then maybe that kinetic power projection will protect things like our hash force and other things that maybe we'll need from a kinetic standpoint. I think what Trump and Doge are doing in no unclear terms is showing us that the federal government needs none of it. Right? They don't need to tax. They don't need to have special interests. They don't need to run the banking system. And so when you start to erode all of these things that have been constructed, what's left of the nation state?
Right.
And I think as we talk in the Bitcoin world, when we flip the role of who owns the power in the government, so if we own the power and the government works for us, and we're basically a nation of sovereign individuals, then the nation state only exists to serve us. And so we get to define that as we move forward. And we get to have debates, as we continue, of what do we want to keep and what do we want to give away, to the point that with Bitcoin and your ability to do brain wallets and things like that, the nation state can't keep you in anymore. So if America goes rogue again and we don't like it, we can just take our brain wallet and go to Russia or go to El Salvador or go to China. Because it's interesting, because right now the governments don't compete to keep us.
Yeah.
From a I want you in my country standpoint, they fight to keep us from the standpoint of you are my subject, you are my slave, and you have nothing to do about it. Whereas it'll transition much more to we are in constant competition to keep you, because there's so many like attractive options out there, like, Africa when it gets going, Europe when it gets going. Like, maybe that's a little bit more attractive than America one day. And maybe we want to move there instead of everybody wanting to move here. And what world is that going to look like when governments are actually saying, oh shit, what am I going to do good for my people to keep them here?
Right.
Right. And so the nation state will change its function significantly if it's not absolved entirely. And I'm with you. I think the Bible and God have given us some very clear instructions, and history has proven that out time and time again, that there are certain first principles things that are needed to have a functioning cooperative society. And in terms of sovereign and sovereign systems, the layers of warfare, spiritual, in my opinion, being at the very top, God is sovereign. If there is a God, I believe there is a God. I believe there's one true God, and he's defined in the Bible. He is sovereign. He created everything, entirely everything. Okay, so now he gives us this life manual, the Bible, and he says, hey, within what I've created, you, man, have specific sub-sovereignties that you get to tend to. You are a spiritual leader of your house, right? You get to go run a family as I designed it. You get to, well, we weren't supposed to have kings and governments, but we begged for them. And so he said, here's the framework that you would have to have for governments and how they would work most efficiently. And then everything gets perverted, like I said, with like the enemy. It's always an inversion of whatever God says. And so then we get what we got now. And so it's like, if we recognize those layers of sovereignty and we, give our, if you can't project spiritual power, then you're always subject to the enemy, and the enemy being Satan, because whether or not you project spiritual power, it's very clear that they both exist, good and evil, right? You can call it God and Satan, you can call it good and evil. And so if you're not projecting good power projection, then you're subject to the evil. And so that's kind of a roundabout way of the way I'd answer kind of that first part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And, even when you mentioned Satan and the thought of evil, I mean, I loved that drop that said, I think it said, does Satan exist? Does the belief of, or, I think it was Satan, right? Does Satan exist? Does the belief in Satan exist? And I thought it was a great bicameral, a great way to cut off people who are not theological, people who are not religious, from just basically rugging in their own mind the veracity of the first principles on display by saying, hey, whatever you think of the nature or form that evil takes, people absolutely behave in accordance with it existing, which is a de facto way of saying it does exist no matter what, right? I think, therefore I am. Well, I do evil, therefore evil exists. I do good, therefore good exists. That's how these things work. It's pretty inarguable. I've often talked about how recognizing that evil does exist and is far more ubiquitous than I ever knew, or maybe depraved, was my way of that reverse engineered me to a belief in God. Right. Because I never went full atheist, and it's not just because I don't believe in that anymore. It's just I never really went full atheist. I always believed in something, but I did all the cute, like it's the universe and it's this and that, and but always had a very strong belief in good and evil and right and wrong. And if you do have a strong belief in those things, you have to believe that there is a God and that there is opposition forces. Before we get into that, and that's the major thing I want to end on the multipolarity discussion. I want the class to pay attention. This is how I think of it. It's very similar to how you described that. I like how you described competition, right? Like sort of, if we're the individual sovereigns, then maybe there can be layers of sovereignty built atop us, but only with our direct buy-in. And when we talked earlier about mandate, there's got to be this loop of constant mandate checking, of constant consensus checking. Communism is the ultimate subversion of that, right? It's the illusion of consensus when all it is domination of the many by the few. And we want the opposite of that. Somebody at Agart gave me this, and I don't remember who they were, so I'm sorry. So remind me who you were. This is an actual Matryoshka doll from Russia. It's even got the Cyrillic on the bottom there. And you guys have all seen this, right? Russian nesting dolls. This is a super simple kindergarten way that I think about the solution. So we've got the nation state. We've got the individual state.
Banking,
We've got the town. And then all the way down, you keep pulling the layers back, and we've got the individual, the sovereign individual. And I think for me, like it's such a simple analogy, but it's the way I could think of this working is if we are in a game, if the system becomes the game that we're all playing, to your point, incentive structures, which also means disincentive structures, right? A strong enough incentive structure in a positive direction is a disincentive structure in the opposite direction. If you are incentivized in a positive way, you are simultaneously disincentivized in a negative way. If it is in your best interest, to your point as a nation state, to make your people happy, you are obviously by definition disincentivized in making them unhappy. If you are disincentivized to kill people because or to commit crimes in Texas because everybody has a gun, then you are incentivized to be good to other people. That's how this sovereignty stuff works. And one of the terms I use in my writing a lot that makes me think of the nesting dolls is radiation. I wrote an article a few years ago called Sovereign Radiation. Bitcoin is very, fits right in like a glove to this. And as I want you to talk about Jesus and the Bible and the teachings and the lessons there, this idea of, well, can we have a system where we just think about this differently and we just invert it and we say, hey, we are the sovereigns and made in God's image. And what was God's gift? Wasn't it sovereignty? Isn't that the whole thing? And so that's where the power, the smallest doll in the Matryoshka is where the power starts. But then maybe it can radiate up through other systems, through other layers. But I think we do have to be careful there, right? But I wonder how you think about that, of whether we can keep checks on the systems built atop us and keep them sovereign.
Entropy is a reality of the universe in what I would consider a fallen universe. And so the universe, I don't believe, was created this way. I think it was created to be different. And I think things happened, right? The fall, the apple, right? Whatever you want to conceptualize that as, sin is real. Evil is real. And because of that sin and because of that evil, we can't be who we need to be, right? No matter how hard we try. And it's interesting when you look at the Bible, it is a series of stories, like you would say, and a bunch of examples of what not to do, right? The Bible in no certain terms glorifies humans. It certainly doesn't glorify the Israelites. It literally says, do not do this, right? This is time and time again proof that this behavior will result in death and destruction. And those behaviors are a multifaceted list of sins, right? And it's interesting because most folks have negative connotation anytime you mention the Bible or Christianity. And I don't even like the term Christianity, right? Because it's been captured. Our churches have by and large gone mainstream or woke, right? But you cannot take a group of sinners, let's say the church, and use that to characterize God, right? God is wholly separate from a group of sinners. He's sovereign over all, and they exist differently, and them failing is not his failing, right? And you get this, once you've read the Bible, you kind of understand that the Old Testament, the law, all of those things were simply to prove to us that we can't live perfectly, right? I don't know that anybody would argue that we can't live perfectly. I can't, you can't. And now that you have a young baby, you'll understand that we are indeed born sinners. You're not going to teach your kid to lie. Your kid is going to lie already. It's just built in us. Like as soon as they start to get that incentive structure of trouble and pain, they want to avoid it. And so they'll lie. And there's all kinds of examples. But okay, so we take the Old Testament, we take the law, we say we're not perfect. What's the solution? Right. And that's where, Christ has come in. He did what he did, died and was resurrected. And that's the atonement of the sin. And that's more theological than I want to get tonight. But he boils it all down on the other side. He basically says, like I said earlier, you do not need a religious hierarchy to have freedom and love in God. You don't have to have a central body giving you permission to believe in the one true God who created you. Right? You can have access directly. And so he gave us sovereignty in that area. And then he basically says the entire book, the Bible, can be summarized in two incentives, two first principles: love God and love people. Right? So it's like love God and love people. And it's that simple. You don't need a religion. You need a relationship. Like my favorite is Romans 10:9. It says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that he raised him from the dead, that's it. You're saved, right? Because you've made that acknowledgement before the creator of the universe that you're not the creator, right? And because I'm not the creator, I can't create things, right? Like, I think I heard an analogy, and it was like, there's some scientists, and, they are successful in cloning a human being. And God would turn to that and say, now make your own dirt, right? Like there's just no end to the brilliance of creation. And, we talk about mathematical impossibilities all the time with the Q plan. And it's like, it's mathematically impossible that we were just, evolved from some sludge pool, right? Like there is intelligent design in our beings and nature. And so that's kind of really cool. And all of that. And I just like to always hit that. It's like Satan has absolutely wrecked the understanding of how simple it is to just come to a relationship with the one true God. Once you come to that relationship, go read the Bible. It's just literally telling you like what not to do. There's some cool stories in it. And I found time and time again that it's an infinite source of wisdom. And so I read it often and go down all those rabbit holes too. You want to think the Q drops are cool? Go read the Bible. The Bible reads and walks like Q drops, and especially some of the New Testament stuff. And I think where somebody mentioned it in the chat tonight is Jesus spoke in parables, right? He spoke in these things that were kind of like Q drops. And one day I was reading in the Bible and it popped out to me interesting, kind of like the cops and robbers thing with Cash. And it was, let me find it here. It was Jesus saying, they asked him, they're like, why do you talk in parables? Why? And he said, I talk to you in parables because the other side doesn't understand. And so here, I love to do this. Put yourself in Jesus's shoes, right? I'm Jesus. I'm literally the best, most coolest revolutionary ever. And
I'm clipping that. I'm clipping that section. Pip says he is Jesus and the cool.
Oh yeah. Yep. I'm not Jesus. But anyways, you're in his shoes and you're trying to take down a centralized power hierarchy, much like we're trying to do. There's the deep state and there are the Pharisees and the scribes, and they were controlling people religiously. And so if I'm trying to take that down, I'm going to have to wage certain types of information warfare, right? I'm going to have to propagate my message. I'm going to have to get the nodes and the consensus in order to do, to get people to believe, right? And so he said, I talk in parables because they don't understand. So he was basically saying, like, I'm encoding my language for you because you have the key, and I know that they don't have the key, and therefore I'll be able to do what I need to do without them killing me first. And so, like, in this one writing was like, if you study the Gospels, it's literally Jesus going around truth bombing everybody he comes up across, especially these opposition leaders, until they kill him. Right? It's like, what a blaze of glory. He called himself the truth and, all that stuff. But it all comes down to, like, he was either insane or he was what he said he was, which was God. And so, I mean, all that to how did you want to take this conversation? I know that you
I want to get
read some of my writings.
Yeah, I want to get more into that. I do want to shout out this comment, and I've seen this commenter before. I know they're not a troll, Blue 7i. I just want to, as a teaching moment here, for anybody listening, says, for someone so immersed in Bitcoin, this dude is brilliant, in all caps, in the spiritual sense. Now, I agree with you, Blue 7i, but the implication there is that despite or in spite of being a Bitcoin maximalist, Pip is extremely spiritual and thinks about these things from a first principles perspective. And without going too deep into that rabbit hole, I would just suggest that the fact that you're so taken with his spiritual beliefs and the way he's elucidating them and the engineering mindset and first principles mindset that he is displaying, that is the mindset and the belief system that led this man to becoming a Bitcoin maximalist. So, it doesn't mean that you have to be in the audience, but that I do see that a lot where people are like, you're brilliant. And I agree with but I can't believe you believe in Bitcoin. And then you'll ask them about, like, well, what do you know about Bitcoin? Oh, nothing. Right. But anyway, that's why Bitcoin maximalists can get a little bit defensive, because you say, like, I really like the way you're thinking and the way you're elucidating your thoughts, but clearly you haven't spared any thought into this thing that you've invested your life energy into, right? On the spirit, if you want to respond to that, you can.
Yeah. So first, I would say thanks for the comment. It was a great comment. And second, all glory to God. Like, I don't sit here and take credit for my brain, for my being, for what I'm called to do. Like, I believe getting into podcasts and writing this stuff was a call from God. I received that call and said, you need to go do this when I lost my job. And so it's no coincidence I'm here. I was just obedient to the calling. And so that being said, the Bible was like the first thing that I geeked out on. Like, when I first went to church and, it kind of hit me right. Like, once I saw the system and I saw that evil was real and that I could do nothing inside of myself to save myself, and I needed the one true God to save me, right, from a spiritual sense, I went down this rabbit hole and I started reading the Bible and reading the Bible and reading the Bible. I still read the Bible. Like I probably read the Bible more than anything that I do. And I read it over and over and over again. And I listen to podcasts over and over and over again, just different pastors. And like, who knows how long I've studied it, and it's infinitely wise. And so the encouragement here is, if you're not reading the Bible, you're missing out. If you're not looking at Bitcoin, you're missing out. If you're not in the Q drops, you're missing out, because they're all systematic deployments over the course of human history to get us to a more sovereign state. I wrote about in that one article that God desires for us to be free, and he desires love. And both of those things require free choice. If you force freedom, it's slavery. And if you force love, it's rape. And so God, when he created us, he needed to instill free choice so that we could reciprocate true love, right? And that's our jobs here, is in the spiritual sense, is to love God and love your neighbor. I get to choose that. A lot of people don't. And it is what it is. But
what are your thoughts on, I saw it in the comments, but you know, two things on the Bible. When it comes to money, people talk about it, references gold and silver as, you know, the
because they had computers.
So it references gold and silver, and then Jesus. I have not read the Bible yet, but I'm excited to, because I will be doing so with an InfoWar mindset and a mindset about first principles and coming from the Q drops and all that kind of stuff, like you said. But one thing I've thought of as interesting, as far as I understand it, it seems that one of the only displays in the narrative of real anger out of Jesus is toward the money changers, right? Is that a fair representation? And, you know, again, what do you think about the gold, silver, and then the money changers in the Bible?
Well, it's funny because what Cash said earlier, that the Federal Reserve is likened to robber barons. Jesus says, you know, when he's flipping the table and he's rebuking the money changers in the temple, that you've turned God's house into a den of thieves, I think is what he says. And so he's, in the same sense, upset about the same slavery that was going on. Like, these people were, you know, extorting basically high interest rates for money changing. And so people travel to the temple and they need to give sacrifice, you know, per the old system. Jesus hadn't died yet, and decentralized all that and made sense of it. And so these money changers would charge like a bunch to do that. And they'd say, you know, you need this local currency, you need this local bird, you need, you know, whatever it was. And so he's upset at that. He's like, this is not the place to be extorting my people, right? In the middle of my house, which was the temple at the time. And so there's that. And then in terms of like gold and silver and whatnot, like whenever you read the Bible, you have to keep in mind that it was written a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so the things that they say are based on what they knew at the time, right? Like gold and silver were good money. And gold and silver up till maybe 200 years ago was still good money. And Satan has just found a way, you know, the system has found a way to subvert that. And so they didn't have computers back in the day. They didn't have Bitcoin back in the day. Like, if they had, would they have written that Bitcoin was the better money? Probably, right? If they were truly down the rabbit hole. And so I don't ever knock gold and silver. I'm with you. I mean, I have knocked it a lot, but in a sense of like talking to people in the community and stuff, I'm like, if you want to go down that rabbit hole and you want to buy gold and silver, go ahead. And at this point, I don't even care. Like, people come up to me and they're like, hey, should I buy, you know, this Pi coin or, you know, whatever. I'm like, go ahead.
Right.
I don't care. Like, it's not financial advice. Go ahead. Just do whatever you want. If you think you're going to hit the lottery and the 1 in a million, you know, coins that are out there, go ahead. But if you want to truly go down the rabbit hole and you want to learn and discern and understand what those right decisions are, read the books, study the network, right?
Yeah.
Because there's just, if you don't read the Bible and you're trusting a pastor or a friend or your parents to tell you what's in there, you are not sovereign in a spiritual sense. You're giving them trust that they've read it and that they understand it and that they've come to the correct conclusions. And so again, it's like when you boil it down, first principles, I mean, the Bible is real simple. I mean, from New Testament to Old Testament, it says you need Jesus. He's God. Okay. Once you have God, relationship, not religion, you need to love people and love God. And that's pretty easy. It's a simple recipe. Now, if you want to peel the layers back on all that, you want to understand, well, how do I love my wife better? Like, how do I be a better spiritual leader in my house? How do I run a functioning society? Well, there's directions in there that will counsel. A lot of the New Testament, like Paul's writings, are actually rebukes or corrections or instructions to the church, right? Like the churches were already screwed up back then because they're a group of sinners, right? And people are just always going to be people.
Yeah. Well, to our discussion, couple things on that would be, I like that you mentioned it. I've said this before, but I this is with the benefit of hindsight. My family, Boston Irish. My dad is Protestant. They're not really practicing, but my mom Catholic. But I was subjected at times to Catholic Mass, and man, did that turn me off to Christianity, as you say it, right? Because while it makes sense when you're saying, hey, you know, everybody's a sinner, it's almost like that's the default setting, and it's not, in my interpretation, it's not meant to be this thing of, hey, you're a sinner, you should feel awful. It's more like this is a reality of the situation. You being imbued with free will and sovereignty means that you are imbued with the ability to sin. And that's how I understand it now. But when you're a kid and you're being communicated to by these proxies, these self-described proxies of God, especially in Irish Catholic Church, it is taken very literally and very negatively. And being a smart kid, I think, or at least a kid who was geared toward first principles long before I knew what they were, I couldn't help but ask the why question of going, okay, let me take your word for it. God exists, God created me, and I'm bad, right? Like that was how the narrative was communicated in those churches. And I have a different understanding of it. The way that you're laying it out tonight, it makes a lot more sense to me now with these kind of awakening eyes through the InfoWar and everything. But I think that you can see the damage that applying a system, gilding something like Christianity or spiritual belief in this system of religion can have these consequences. You might say it was intentional to drive people away from it. And because, it's just, you're not going to sell anybody on anything, right? Like this is something I say to Bitcoin maximalists, some of them, which you've seen. Like,
Ray said it to me.
Well, I've always went to bat for you and G Money. We just butted heads on specific things, but even the Q community, the Truth community, MAGA and America First, I think you can apply this, what I'm about to say, to a lot of these things. If your version of red pilling somebody is to tell them that like they suck, they're an idiot, etc., on down the line, then it's just not going to have the effect that you supposedly want. If you don't care about that effect, then that's totally fine, right? If you're like, I'm going in this direction, you go in that direction, whatever, get rugged if you want to get rugged. But I think when it comes to religion or spirituality, if you're introducing children to God by telling them that they are bad, inherently bad, and that's how it's being communicated to them, they are not going, I can tell you by experience, they are not going to see God as a benevolent force or something that they want to follow. They're going to see God as something that they need to escape from. Because as you mentioned with like the good analogy of kids lie because they don't want to be punished, if your first lessons, and this is just my opinion, to children about God are punishment based, then I just don't know if that's the right angle, because they're going to be like, all right, well, I mean, I didn't ask you to make me. You made me and you're mad, right? It's almost like that concept of original sin. Now I understand it differently. But the way Catholics talk about original sin is like, oh, you are bad. You are a piece of shit. God's mad at you and you better ask for forgiveness. And, when you're 37 you're probably going to take that differently. Like, yeah, I've had a long life. I've done a lot of bad stuff. I need to get my shit together. When you're 7, that hits you differently, right? You're like, what did I do? What are you talking about? I like took that cookie that one day, or
Yeah.
and I'm going to burn in hellfire for it. That's just, I think that's how children imprint onto these stories, and people go wrong that way. But I wonder what you think about that in terms of, you used a term earlier that I'm most interested in you talking about, and that is that Jesus in the Bible, as I understand it now, and I've loved some of your writings on this, that's not really the way it seems to be communicated when you're going to the source. The communication seems to be much more rooted in first principles, much more proactive. And then the last thing that you mentioned is decentralized. And I'm really interested in, first of all, what do you think about that the dichotomy between, almost shaming positive versus negative when it comes to God, the story of God. And then secondly, the concept of decentralization, and how does that factor into the original teachings of Jesus?
Yeah, it's all good discussion, and I agree. There's definitely a lack of tact in a lot of religion, right? And that's why I always encourage people to go read it for themselves. And the Bible's a long book, and you can break it up into many different ways to go through it. My favorite is I download the Bible app, and I go to sleep with it reading to me. And then I just start in Genesis and I go through Revelation, and the next day I'll just start wherever I remembered falling asleep, right? What was the last thing I remember? And I just keep going and I just keep going. And you just hear these stories and you just hear all these consequence results. It's basically like cause and effect relationships, in human history and human behavior. But, the key is that God is love. God is a loving God. He loves all of us. And he didn't design the world to be the way that it is. He didn't design people to go to hell. Hell was created for Satan and his armies, the angels that fell with him. And the Bible's clear about that. However, he is a just God, and he told Adam and Eve to not go down the sinful path. And so the Bible is just replete with examples of, and it's not that he does the punishing, right? It's not that he's doing the judgment. It's like, you guys are off course, and therefore you're seeing these consequences I warned you about. And it breaks my heart, right? It's not the heart of God that you would go become an alcoholic like I was, right? Like, it's just not his heart. But when I was an alcoholic and I was rebelling against God, and when I was doing whatever I thought was right in my own eyes, man, did I bring a lot of destruction and death into my life, right? Now, when I repent and I'm no longer that way, I'm better in that area. And just because you come to relationship with Jesus Christ doesn't make you perfect. You're still literally the same sinner, except for this time you've just acknowledged that before the Most High, the perfect one, right? And so you go through a process that they call like sanctification. And sanctification means that over time, as you are aligned with God's incentive structure, you're going to look more and more like him to the end of your life. And I love the analogy of, it's in Malachi, it's the refiner's fire. And it's in the back, talk about gold and silver in the Bible. They would take gold ore and they'd put it in a cauldron, and they would get it really, really hot, right? Fire it up, and they'd stir it. And all the impurities over time would float to the top. And the refiner, who's God in this picture, would scrape away that dross, right? You'd get your impurities removed slowly but surely over time as you get heated up and stirred about. And that's what life does to us. It heats us up and it stirs us about. And sometimes it's our own doing, and sometimes it's somebody else's doing. But that process would continue until the refiner would look into the cauldron, and on the bottom see the purified gold and silver and see his reflection. Right? This life is about bringing us back to him. And so if hell was created for Satan and his minions, and it was never meant for us, and we can so choose to go there with him, then what I see Christ and what I see this spiritual discussion being, much like we'll say in the Bitcoin sense, in a financial sense, is it's a filtration mechanism. So if in the Bible, in the end, it says God's going to come back and he's going to make a new earth and a new Jerusalem, whatever heaven looks like, right? Then he's not going to bring the bad energy with. And that bad energy is supposed to be Satan and his enemies or his, cohorts. It's not supposed to be us. And it's unfortunate when people choose in their pride and arrogance to say they just can't accept that there's one true God, right? Is there a creator of the universe or is there not? Right? That's really as simple as it comes to. And if the answer is there is a creator, then are you subject to his rule? Right? He made you. Like if I'm a potter and I'm, working clay, is the clay gonna rebel against the potter? No. I mean, I don't even think it could in that example, right? But it's just as you sit with the Bible, you're just like, again, it's just so much like wisdom.
I had a question.
Go read the Proverbs.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I one question that you probably get all the time, but we're trust don't verify, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about that a lot when it comes to sovereigns and systems. And I'll admit that a hang up that I've had about reading the Bible, even today, is the trust don't verify nature, not of belief in God. I think that those are separate things now. I've fully carved those things as separate things. I do think it's possible to discern the presence and existence of God through a first principles kind of belief framework. But I wonder what your response is to verification when it comes to the Bible or the versions of the Bible that I have access to or that we have access to. Is it possible to trace? I don't know the answer to these questions. Is it possible to trace these words back to anything verifiable in terms of a specific time period? Or
it's a good question, and it comes up all the time, and that's usually where it's like Bitcoin, right? You tell somebody about Bitcoin and they automatically have some things that they've heard, right?
Yeah.
And so I've spent a lot of time with the Bible and a lot of time in biblical apologetics, and the Bible says that, to your point, at a first principles level, nature, creation declares his glory. If I go look out at a starry night in the middle of the desert when it's all pitch black, I know that there's a God. I know that there's a creator, and I know that I'm not him. And you talk about the Bible. Well, let's just go to the King James version, right? That's like the original translation into English, and you understand that as a word for word translation of the manuscripts that are out there, right? Like, I don't know Greek, I don't know Hebrew, right? I understand the process by which we got King James version, right? And so that's like one thing. You can go all the way back to the root words. You can go all the way back to the Hebrew and Greek. And so when you're talking like multiple translations, what are they? There's probably like 200 different translations of the Bible in English, right? There's English Standard Version, a Christian Standard Version, a New American Standard Bible, and all of that. And they each one are just trying to make the term, the language more relatable than King James.
Yeah.
Thou, thy, thee, whatever. And so that's one piece of it, right? I believe you can trace back to some pretty ancient documents that are in existence that say these things, right? And I don't believe in like carbon dating and things like that, but you can trace it back. And then you look at outside of like the Bible. We defined our whole human calendar off of Christ's birth and death, right? AD and BC. And so it was significant enough to change to basically mint a new block for humanity. We updated the ledger of time. And so that's like one thing. And, if you talk the Bible, it's what, 66 books, 1,189 chapters, over 40 authors. And so when you read the Bible, you see 40 different people attest to the same truths.
Right.
And what's really cool is when you start studying the Old Testament, you see all of the pointing to Jesus, like in Genesis 3:15, the first sharing of the gospel from God. He says to Satan, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, capital S. Woman doesn't have seed, speaking of the virgin birth. he shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel, speaking to the crucifixion and then resurrection. And so you see all these foreshadowings of Jesus in all of these different pages. And so you're saying like, okay, when I look at the Bible and I read it holistically, it doesn't contradict itself and blah, blah, blah. And I see all these other folks, like, oh, you should read this book of Enoch and, this other thing that's, not in the canon. And there are reasons why those are not included in the standard, books of the Bible, because they're not they just don't make sense in certain like theological aspects when compared to the rest of the book. And so it's a conglomeration. Like, are there missing books of the Bible? Well, I mean, there could have been other things written, like Paul wrote a bunch of the New Testament, with his letters to the churches. Did he write more letters to the churches? Probably, right? There was probably all kinds of letters that he wrote, but we don't have those. And if, I'm not aware of it. And then what I also like is, when you get into, your deeper apologetics, you can go back into like historical books, like where there'd be like Roman senators or subjects or historians, in like the 1st century AD, 2nd century AD, who are talking about this group of Christ followers. Like, these guys believed it, right? And so you go all the way back and you're like, they're outsiders saying, hey, they believe that this Jesus guy was God, right? And so you at least have that data point that I believe that we have no uncertain terms that he was real. He existed, right? Now, was he God? That's, for the debate here. And then you see other people saying, well, all the people around him, like this following, believed he was. And then you look at like the disciples, and they literally would have had the easiest out to not believe this.
Right.
Most, like almost 80% of them were killed for their beliefs. They were hunted down and killed. Like Peter was crucified upside down, according to the historical records, like for what it's worth, right? And so you get all of these data points, right? And I get it, the trust but verify thing, it gets a little bit interesting when you've gone over the course of human history. But, the Bible's pretty clear that, when Jesus came back after, so he was resurrected and he spent a few days with the apostles. I think it was like 40 days or something like that. And he found Timothy, and Timothy was the doubter. And Timothy was like, I'm not going to believe it's you, this reincarnate Christ. I'm not going to believe it's you unless I touch your hands, the holes in them, and touch your side where they put the spear. And so he let him do that. And the story, Jesus says, what does he say? He's like, seeing you believe, but blessed are those who, Okay. Jesus said to him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. So he's like, I'm standing here in the flesh, basically, in this, resurrected form, whatever. You've touched my wounds, and therefore you've believed. You've trusted. You've not trusted, but verified.
Right.
But blessed are those who have not seen yet have believed, knowing the future. God's all knowing. He knows the end. He's seen the end from the beginning. And so he's already projecting forward to these questions. He's going to say there's going to come a time where people are going to have faith, right? And so I can't say that, that's not faith required, right? But my life experience has shown me time and time again that it's real. And like I can look out at the world today, and there's no uncertain terms that things that are written about in the Bible manifest exactly the way that they were said they manifest. And so, you see what I'm saying? Like, there's still some gray area, but I think that's a lot of data.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. And I think about this stuff, again, reverse engineering it from the Q drops. That'll be my last question to you, is on the decentralization.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about the Q drops, it's similar to what you're talking about, right? Can you and I verify that the Q drops were disseminated by patriots working with or behind the Trump administration, who are going to war with the deep state, and that there is a military intelligence plan, and there is a sovereign alliance, and they are opposing the globalists, and they are going to win, and they do have it all? Can we verify that? No, we can't. But most people who have followed the drops for a long time and have come to believe in them, it's an interesting mirror to everything you're talking about when it comes to scripture. Because you just say, okay, well, what are the ideas? I always focused a lot less on whether or not I could verify that the drops were coming from Patriots. Other people do that, and I looked at those things, and I'm not saying that they're useless of people, using their deltas and comms and everything, but there is no direct evidence. There's a lot of overwhelming circumstantial evidence that I think is compelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of the connection between the drops and the Trump administration. As you said, it would be orders of magnitude impossible from a mathematics perspective. Technically, though, we can't verify it. But the reason I think we can trust it is the first principles espoused in the drops are so inarguable from a logical perspective. The reveals in it, the Socratic method, led us to all these things. Future proves past. So I can totally understand. And that's why I think reverse engineering it is a good pathway. But something you've mentioned a few times and that we've talked about in private, you've written about, I guess it's relevant to the drops and to parables you mentioned earlier. But there is that kind of decentralization aspect. We're talking about systems. To round everything of systems and sovereignty into form, I thought it would be really interesting when I was going to have you on to say, is what's depicted in the Bible, is the story of Jesus, is the story of God, the ultimate sort of answer to the questioning we've done tonight on, is it possible to have a sovereign system? That's where my head started to go, to say, well, isn't that kind of what Jesus is? Isn't that kind of what the Bible is? Like, it's saying, here's like a system, here's a story, here's a bunch of lessons in a system, but it is your choice to interface with that system. But I wonder what you think about that, especially in terms of when you mentioned decentralization.
Yeah, lot there. I will echo that. Yes. At what point does it become mathematically impossible? And just like with the Q drops, is just like with Bitcoin, which is just like with the Bible. I found all of those to have enough evidence to believe, right? I have more faith in believing these Q drops came from these patriots than I do that the Bible's written, right? Like, it takes more faith for me to believe that, right?
Right.
And same with Bitcoin, even. Like, it's a creation. Like, man created it. It's not God. Like, it's not going to replace God. It's not going to change anything outside of that sector of the system that it affects, right? It's a deployment. And I think this always goes back. I'll get to your second part, but with your General Quast will mention this time and time and time again, and that was a great interview with him last week. And sorry I didn't say that earlier up front for him, but it was a great interview. And he always talks about moral code, right? We need an incentive structure. And the Bible is just a good incentive structure. Yeah. If you read it and you understand it, there's nothing bad in it, right? There's consequences for bad behavior, but that's not, like, the Bible's not bad. God is not bad. God is only working for your good. And so it kind of gets in, this one's going to get into the Trinity, because there's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and they all coexist. It's basically three ways to communicate the one true God and his nature to us humans created that can't understand all that, right? And so it says in the book of John, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was God, and he was with God. And then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And so it's speaking of Christ. And so it puts Christ back in the beginning. And it's like when God's creating the universe, he says, let us make man in our image, right? Whose image? Well, Son, Father, Son, and Spirit. The Spirit's hovering over the void, right? So they're all there. And so in terms of like that decentralized system, God came down to decentralize what man had created to give them direct access to a good incentive structure. Like, that's how I kind of see the Bible in its first principles perspective.
Yeah.
And
the ultimate framework of first principles, really. It's the first principle.
Right. He is capital P principle, right? First
right.
principle. And it really just, it's like people just get stuck on admitting that he's real. Like, I mean, it's just that simple. It's like, I don't know, there's like a pride or an ego with it, and you have to like admit that you're not perfect. Like, heaven forbid, like somebody's got to admit that they're not perfect, even though their life demonstrates it, right?
Yeah, I think some of that goes back around to what we started this discussion with, and what so many of us got into the truth community because of, which is an understanding of the subversion and the dominance of the system. And I mean, look at something that just popped in my head. Like, look at COVID and that era, where people who have not been brave enough to exercise their discernment and to embrace first principles, they can be dominated, right? They can be dominated by positions of authority. They can be dominated by men in white coats. It's an article that I always wanted to write and never got around to it, but
white robes also.
Yeah, exactly. The new priesthood, right? Talk about gatekeepers and systems, and people get real beaten down by that. But with that said, understanding, as we've talked about tonight, ultimately we had a choice to know that COVID was bullshit, or at least, that it was our choice to comply with these things or not. And that means our fellows did. And I think you can apply all that to this stuff. It's just that I think that it is ego and it is pride in a lot of people, but I also think that there's a lot of fear of, well, what I think it is for a lot of people is of not embracing belief, is fear that they might be wrong, and fear that they're going to believe in something so amazing. I mean, we see it in the truth community, right? Like, some people don't believe in the drops and everything because they're afraid that they're going to believe in something that's never going to come to pass. And I think maybe that's at the root of some people's fear to embrace it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, I'll say it to people all the time. Like, and so another key point, like, and it's kind of like the Bitcoin versus altcoin discussion, but it's following Christ versus all other religions.
Yeah.
All other religions say that you have to do good works to be good enough to get into heaven or the nirvana or wherever you're going to go after this. The Bible is the only one that says there is no good work that you can do. And therefore you need to believe that there's a God to save you. Right. And so, what is it here? Ephesians 2:18. Yeah, I'm probably not going to find the address right here. Oh, for by grace, God gives the grace. He's a gracious God. You have been saved through faith. You have to come to that acknowledgement, right? Just like you said, there's all we give our faith and our trust to the weatherman, but we don't give faith and trust
he's an expert.
To the one true God, right? Yeah, he's an expert. And it's not of yourself. It's the gift of God. God has given us salvation. Not of works. We cannot work. There's no work that we can do. God in the Bible, I was reading in the Psalms the other day, he's like, if I was hungry, I wouldn't ask you because you couldn't feed me.
Right.
And it says that there's no works required because we would boast about it. We would find a way to brag that we are better than one another. And so it's an equal playing field. It's egalitarian. And then because of salvation and because we love him and because we love his people, we then go do good works. And so that's like the gospel kind of in a different way. We've said it in several different ways tonight, but I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those.
No, it's well said.
Paradoxes of life. Like I love the Bible because it's a bunch of perfect paradoxes. God's way is a perfect paradox from the way of the world. And Satan is on a constant mission to pervert every single thing in that book in all ways possible. Does Satan exist? Does the thought of Satan exist? Do these people worship Satan? Do they do it explicitly? Like what you experienced in the Catholic religion to some small subset, right? Like those are all perversions and inversions to get you to not make that acknowledgement, to miss the signal. And what I always tell people is at least with following Christ, the only consequence of being wrong is that I guess we all going to figure out when we go to the other side.
Right.
But,
yeah.
But the consequence of being wrong, right? I don't know. It's like, if you're
I've
right,
read that too. Yeah.
if you're right, then great. And if you're wrong, then you just have to face whatever consequences at the end. And if you want to make that I guess there's no consequence to believing it outside of the persecution you face by the world and the opposition. And it's like, who cares? We face opposition all the time.
It's the ultimate game theory. And it's so funny. Maybe we've talked about this behind the scenes. I literally have a Word document open on my browser right now. My next one of my long forms I've been working on for quite a while, and drop it and pick it back up, is all about the Q drops and it's trying to reconcile some of the paradoxes and of how people are treating them that I don't totally like. Doesn't mean I'm the arbiter of truth on that stuff, but the title of the article is Perfect Paradox.
Oh, nice. I like that.
Yep. And so I totally get where you're going with that. But yeah, man, I think we figured everything out. I think everything
we definitely gave it a good go.
Yeah. I think this is great. I know you've got work in the morning. I know you have an army that outstrips mine by a factor of 4-1 right now. A very young army. So I really appreciate you joining. Yeah, man, I love that discussion. Like the system. Hope you guys got something out of it. Systems. It's like once you recognize the system, as you said early in the show, you can't unsee it. And maybe the same can be said of the solutions, right? The same can be said of once you understand the truth, you can't unsee the truth. Once you understand God, you can't unsee God. These things are all baked in. So that's why whether I criticize, some approaches, etc., we're all human. We're all we've got our ways of looking at these things. But I am very optimistic about this stuff, and that sovereignty will win out over the system. And I think that Patriots in Progress is optimistic on that viewpoint as well.
Absolutely. I'm very optimistic. God already knows how it all plays out. I'm confident in what he's got for us. He works all things for good to those who are called, according to his purposes. And so we'll just have to see. It's like with Bitcoin, it's like with Q, it's like with the Bible. You wish so bad that people would at least take the time to give it a good shake. Right. I'm really excited for you to go read the Bible and read it with your lenses and ask all the questions that you ask and don't come to those conclusions until you've got the holistic assessment. Right. Yeah. And really dive into it and ask him when you read that for the first time, like God, if you're real and you are who you say you are, show me, like meet me in this. Like they call it the living word, because every time you read it, it hits you differently. And there's, again, like no matter how many times I've read it, sometimes I'll like come to a page. I'm like, man, it's like I'm reading this for the first time. It's so fresh and so new to my life. It's so applicable. Right. And it's never like, yeah, I might identify bad behaviors or habits, go watch Rug Pull Radio. I exhibited some of them, I'm sure. Over time, you recognize some of that stuff and you work to change it. But I'm never coming out of like reading my Bible like, oh, I'm a piece of crap, and like, oh, like there's no hope for me, or there's no hope for this world, in the broader sense. But it at least gives you I love that human history is so cyclical, and it just like the Old Testament is just basically this recurring story of the same rise and fall of centralized leaders. Yeah. God told him, he's like, you don't want a king. 1 Samuel 8, he's like, Israelites, you don't want a king. He's going to make you your slave, or he's going to, make you his slave, and he's going to tax you. And he even said, God, in that time, he's like, he's going to tax you at 10%, right? How much are we getting taxed, right? And so you just...
Sounds to me like God's a bit of an extremist and a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, I forget what let me find this one last thing, and I'll leave you with this, I guess. Jesus said, this is New Living Translation, I liked it. Jesus asked them, he's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Because again, he was non-kinetic, non-violent. He was dropping truth bombs, and they just hated being exposed so bad that they killed him. And so I think it's just, he's like the best revolutionary if you study him. I mean, and it's just dropping truth bombs. I mean, nothing that he said was crazy. Fighting. Yeah.
It's
like you said, meek.
Stuff. Meek, yep.
Meek.
A different, certainly different connotation of that word, the original connotation of that word. So thank you very much for joining tonight, Pip. I think people enjoyed it. I hope they did. If you guys want to support Pip, he's still in the info war. Maybe he'll be back around every so often. We've said this about me, about everybody at Badlands. You guys obviously support us when you submit rants and boosts and all this kind of stuff. A platform that those of us who use it are really happy with is Substack. Pip has a Substack, patriotsinprogress.substack.com. I think you can find a lot of the ideas he espoused here. He talks about the Q drops in a way that I don't think many other Anons talk about or analyze the drops. So you guys might really get a lot out of that if you have not gone into these dives. So check that out. Support him there if you want to support the work that he does. The reason that I really love Substack is they take a very minimal amount of the, they take a tiny bit of the dollar that you send over. We all understand the platform's got to make a living, right? Rumble, everybody's got to make a living to provide the platform. But two things, Substack takes a very small amount. Most of your dollar gets to the creator. And then secondly, so far, with everybody I know in the info war and with myself, my own experience, they have not censored. So can't say that about everybody. Obviously, we have a good opinion of Rumble as well. But so far, Substack has not censored anybody. So, we always appreciate that. But thank you for joining, Pip. I'm going to get to the boost.
Thanks for having me.
I know you got a jet. But great conversation. I hope to have many more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was great. I can't say that it was anything like your discussion last week. General, I just love hearing General Quast talk about his exciting things that he doesn't really talk about, right? And he's always dropping just enough truth to keep you
little
interested,
Quast nuggets,
keep you going. Yeah, Quast nuggets, I like that. And we'll definitely have to do it again sometime. And I do hope to continue to make guest appearances. I probably need to make it back to Rug Pull Radio at some point. It was funny. I was kind of thinking about that in my head about a week and a half ago. And then you asked for a guest spot on this. And I'm like, yeah, it probably is time to at least make an appearance. Right.
Yeah.
And so I need to think a little bit harder on that one, but yeah, like I said, great power competition, lots of things going on in the world right now. I think a lot of it's to deter aggression and things like that. And so if we're going to win this war, we got to have all of the systems operating to support the system of systems at the top. And I think we're doing that. So I have great hope that the best is yet to come for sure.
Well said, man. All right.
Adios.
Thank you. And we'll see you later. For you guys, I will go through the boosts and rants. You guys sent a bunch of boosts over last week about the Quast episode, so I guess I should just have him on every week. That was very much appreciate that. VP Nichols sent $10 over and said, amazing show with General Quast. Just wondering, has Patrick been psyoping the good general all this time for a free trip to space? One wonders. Quast said that he would send Patrick to space, and if there is ever a live stream that is going to break all records, it would be that one. So we'll see if it ever happens. AT, $25, fantastic show with General Quast. What a gift he is to Badlands. Did T put him there to watch or advise the Badlands leaders? When General Quast speaks, we all listen. Hat tip, old EF Hutton commercial. Well done, BB. Thank you, AT. Who knows? Who knows how these things work? I've certainly seen enough to believe that the info war is even stranger than we ever believed it was. Stormy Gale, $10. BB, as a teenager, my dad brought me an old newspaper with a headline, 2 Japanese fighter jets attack American carrier. My dad laughed and said, that's the headline, but the story is we were told to hunt down. We were told to hunt down 2 Japanese fighter jets and shoot them down in retaliation for them shooting down 2 of ours. The leaders in the military understood the PR of politics and the narrative. This was early 1950s, so different from today. Yeah, and we're talking about the Bible. If that's the original story, right? This stuff's been going way back. Psyops are nothing new. I mean, you could argue that many religions are psyops. You could argue that the church was a psyop. Nothing new under the sun. It's on each of us to discern. MFAGA? I don't know how to pronounce that, but $50. Had a ball last night watching my preferred host with the general. What an optimistic and refreshing discussion you two had. Thanks for all you do. By the way, congrats for Baby Bright. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to go bail Mrs. Bright out after the stream. She's probably super mad at me that I went late. She's not feeling good right now, so I'm going to bail her out. But thank you very much for that support. What do we got? NC Suburban Mom, $50. I followed you as a Tiger avatar and continue to love all your work, both written and podcasts. Your General Quas interview was stellar. We're so lucky to have your mind in this info war. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And then sent another 25 over and said, parenting tip, train baby Bright to sleep like a champ. I have 3 teenagers who slept like rock stars as babies, toddlers, and small children. And even now, thanks to this book, Healthy Sleep Habits, Happy Child by Dr. Weissbluth. It's a must-have. Thank you. We've received some other recommendations. General Quas sent me a link to one as well, so very much appreciate it. We're trying. We're doing the best we can. My Undivided Life, $50. Really enjoyed the show, BB and Quast. It was the best conversation I have ever heard on the circumstances of our current events. BB, you and Quast have effortlessly engaging and compatible conversational styles. Thanks for a great show. Thank you very much. It's easy to have compatible conversations with the General. Trevor Yanda, $10. Another great show with 2 great minds. Appreciate you giving us your insights to help navigate through the Psy War we are in. Thanks for all you do. And thank you, Trevor. The great thing about the boost is that if you guys are watching this on replay, as these people did, you can send a boost over and I will grab them next week. And that's much appreciated. Much like I said with Substack, most of that dollar makes its way to us because there's not really these intermediaries that we have to go through. But speaking of that, Rumble rants are always a great way to support, and we've got some of those. Tom Terrific, $25. Let the games begin. Cash and Bongino running the FBI. Here is something for popcorn. Yep, man. I mean, you would have been accused of hopium if you told us a few years ago that all this stuff would be happening. You can't even keep up with it. It's insane. D-Mob is now a monthly supporter of Badlands. Thank you. Micro Toolmaker, $117. Very generous lately. Hey, BB, you should get on more shows. Your point of view is valuable and not always shown. Where we go on, we go all. Thank you, Micro. I still work the day job. It's tough. A lot of work, but just trying to split my mind in as many directions as it'll go in without succumbing. But really appreciate all the support and feedback. Appreciate Badlands. Appreciate John for giving me this opportunity. And appreciate you guys. Dan, BB, have you done Office Space on Story Hour? Got to put on the list. There's a bunch of fun proof of work versus proof of stake examples. Plus, it's damn hilarious. I've seen it, but I've not picked it. But that's got to be a shoe-in. The movie for this week is Terminator 2: Judgment Day. It's an all-timer. C Masters, $10. Challenge. Let's show our support for BB, Pip, and Badlands. This is another great episode. Thank you. Darylyn accepted that challenge for $10. Moke Anon. The first quarter of President Trump's first 100 days just ended. We still have 47 more quarters to go. I like that. That sounds like a lot of quarters. C Masters, $10. Darylyn, they deserve it. A lot of work goes into providing all the info they share. We're blessed with all Badlanders. Thank you. It is a lot of work. Never thought that doing shows would be this exhausting, but it is. In a good way. True Deplorable. BB, I've always enjoyed the way you can see the narrative from every angle. By the way, love the cops and robbers analogy. You need to meme that before someone else steals it. Yeah, I get it. I mean, I get it when people are like, you guys get butthurt about other people. Listen, it happens. I was even thinking about this recently. Chris and I are probably get the most pissed off when we see that. And I think it's because we both came from the creative writing world. So, Chris was in Hollywood for a long time and all that, but he was a screenwriter as well. He's a very talented writer. I'm a writer. I was a novelist. We'll be bringing that stuff back around soon under the Burning Bright name. Stealing somebody's story is the worst thing you can do to somebody in the creative world, and there are consequences to it. In the info war, a tricky thing is we're all trying to figure stuff out in open source ways. We're all trying to share information, right? It's not like writing a novel. So I'm not going to pretend it is. And often we do think of things in a similar way, right? Like there can be something that I think I came up with, and then Chris was talking about it on his podcast, or John was writing about it in the Devolution series. This stuff happens. It's okay. But, there are times when people go on their shows or they write social media threads, and they are beat for beat, rip-offs of ideas that other people were talking about or that other people became known for. John has had this happen to him a million times when it comes to devolution. Chris has had it happen to him. A lot of people here have had that happen to them. Zach, Brad, the Stormy and Abs do great Q digs, and people take those and repurpose them as their own. It's not illegal. It's just bullshit. And I'm not going to be friends with people like that. The reason it came to mind recently is that I, as you guys know, have been talking about looking at the Q drops and the Trump movement as a 3-act story following the 3 acts of a magic trip, 3-act structure. Went on many deep dives about that over the years, and wrote an article about that went pretty viral just like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And then I see a viral clip going around of somebody like, oh my God, talking about this. And it's just retarded. Like, cut the shit. If you talk about the devolution series, credit John. If you talk about continuity government, credit where you got it. When I talk about informational time travel, I credit Chris. I try my best to tell people where I got ideas. John even talks about openly that he was first seeded with the idea of devolution from Thomas Victor. So, it's what we're supposed to be doing here. And anyway, probably just hits me on a different level, because if somebody ripped off my novel and reproduced it, I'd lawyer up on them. It's not something you do in the truth community. And again, it's hard to know sometimes if people are taking ideas or coming up with them, but each of us have some pretty specific things we talk about, and then they get disseminated by other people who, whatever. It is what it is, right? Mimicry, flattery, imitation, flattery, you know the thing. But anyway. Banish the shadow. Jesus founded a proof of work system of spiritual authority based on his virtue as shown in the cross, since the exercise of virtue is the only sufficient basis for validation of such authority. Interesting stuff. By the way, I wasn't pushing back on Pip's comments on Jesus. I like digging into this stuff, so asking some of those questions. Banish the shadow. Virtue is the ledger of true spiritual authority. I like that. MS Truth Seeker. Love BB and Pip together. Awesome show. Sent over a dolphin and a frog, or maybe that's a shark. Looks like a shark. Shark and a frog. Banish the shadow. For some pointers on the history of the Bible, Wes Huff appearance on Rogan is actually quite a good place to start. Interesting. And then Jessica Louise rocks, $20. Wonderful discussion, gentlemen. Kofefi 1111. Peace and blessings. You both rock. Stay frosty, friends. Thank you very much for the support. Thank you very much for sharing the show. Please hit the thumbs up button. Support our sponsors, badlandsmedia.tv/meds. Thank you to Pip for joining me. I want to do that. Not every week's going to be a general quast, right? But I like getting different voices on here and hitting different sides of them, because I know everyone in this community probably only knows Pip from talking about Bitcoin. And he talked about it tonight, but it's a first principles, really interesting first principles deep dive. But he's got a lot more to say than that, and I was glad he got to share some of that. And again, speaking of ideas and writings, etc., if you guys do want to check out my work off of the shows, burningbright.substack.com. I wrote a few briefs this past week that you guys might like. Part of it on the Dogening, part of it on the Peacemakers. And that's what's going on. Now I'm starting to feel a little under the weather. I hope we don't have something. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. Much appreciated. Remember, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. I'm outroing with the intro. We'll be back next Sunday night in March, 9 p.m. Eastern. And yeah, peace. I don't know. Get out of here. Just go away. Stop being weird.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Marlowe?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. Now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope! We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You will bring me. Captain Armor, I do not know what strength is in my net. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.